Who was the actor that was first approached to play the main villain Sybok in Star Trek V, The Final Frontier? Whose idea was it to have Commander Uhura perform an exotic dance? How did the death of Dr. McCoy's father affect the actor, Deforest Kelly? These and more questions will be answered on
Back Look Cinema, the podcast.
Damn it, Bones, you're a doctor. You know that pain and guilt can't be taken away with a wave of a magic wand. They're the things that we carry with us, the things that make us who we are. We lose them, we lose ourselves.
I don't want my pain taken away. I need my pain. Hello, my name is Zoe. It's spelled Z-O or Z to the O for those of you outside of the U.S. Welcome back, friends. This is the 217th episode of Back Look Cinema, the podcast, where we take a look back at the movies of yesteryear, especially the movies of the latter half of the last millennium. If you like what you're about to hear, then please tell your family, tell your friends, and tell the closest of comrades, your found family, with whom you've had a lifetime of outer space adventures about Back Look Cinema. Now, the conceit of this show is to share with you movies that I loved when I was growing up or when I was a much younger man. Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. The goal was to reveal the nostalgia or revel in the nostalgia of the movies of the times past and to share these moments with you. But this episode is a little bit different. Last episode, I talked about how Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, was not one of my favorite movies. And until this latest rewatch, I've only seen it once. The first time that I saw it, I never wanted to see it again because I was so disappointed with what I saw. This episode, I can't bring you the joy, love, or appreciation for this film. So I found someone who could. I found someone with whom this movie is utterly amazing. It may, in fact, be his favorite Star Trek film. In this rewatch and discussion, it is my goal to see if I can see this motion picture in a new light and gain new appreciation for what is perhaps a misunderstood work of art. To help me on this journey, please welcome a man that I have admired from afar for a long time. He has a fantastic show. He has an incredible voice and a magnetic way of presenting facts and entertainment intertwined in the same show. He's joyful, he's jovial, and his podcast, Saturday Morning Podcast, is a podcast after my own heart. Please welcome everybody from here, from sea to shining sea, Christopher J.
Hi, Zoe.
Hello, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
Doing?
Oh, I'm good. I appreciate being on here. I couldn't be happier to be on here to talk about Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. Not exactly the greatest of Star Trek movies, but I think one of the more fun ones.
Oh, okay. Awesome. So I was thinking from talking to you before that this was going to be your favorite Star Trek movies, but you are acknowledging that it's not maybe the absolute best film.
I think that honor probably goes to like Star Trek 2, but I think that there's a different way that we should be looking at Star Trek 5. I don't know when you want to get into that, but I think that there's a different way to really look at it that makes it maybe not the best movie, but some of the movies out there that we think are the best aren't necessarily the ones that the critics loved or did a lot of box office. They're the ones that touch us in some way. And that's what this did for me when I was 13 and it was first in theaters in 1989. And so I think maybe from the perspective I saw it and the way I keep seeing it as an adult is what sort of influenced me and why I love it. I also think it's one of the more fun Star Trek movies that, well, it deals with big issues. It also has slapstick and wordplay and, you know, row your boat around the campfire. And it just has these moments that I'm glad that they exist exists in Star Trek, even if nobody else does, because I feel that it has a high entertainment value, even if it doesn't have like a high value for drama or doesn't exactly follow in the footsteps of the Star Trek movies that came before it. So I find it to be a lot of fun. It's one of those that if it's on, I'm going to watch it from wherever it's at, even if it's at the beginning, and get to the end because I love every minute of it.
That's pretty awesome. I'm glad to hear that. And to tell you the truth, there are a lot of movies that I like that are not critical darlings, right? And
right.
we all have a way of appreciating certain things that are not necessarily something that critics are incredible, absolutely infatuated with. And conversely, there are films that critics absolutely love, like, especially if you're somebody who considers themselves a film aficionado or a science fiction guru. If they feel like these are like the best films, I'm speaking specifically of like 2001: A Space Odyssey, that it's held to a very high pinnacle. And I'm not one of those people who appreciate it in that way.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's funny. 2001: A Space Odyssey, decades ago, I told my now first wife, my ex-wife, I'm like, hey, I've heard great things about this. I'm a science fiction fan. I want to get a copy of it and I want to watch it. And it was like $20 on DVD at that point. And so she supported me in getting it because $20 was, we were newly married at that point. So $20 was a lot. And I popped it in and I got maybe 20 or 30 minutes into it and I just couldn't get into it. So I shut it off. It took me like 4 or 5 times before I could fully get into it. And then once I did, I'm like, okay, cool. I got that out of the way. I have my cinema cred is still good out on the street here. Like I've seen one of the classics that from beginning to end, that's great. And then about 6 months later, I'm like, I want to watch that again. And I watched it from beginning to end. It's like 2.5 hours long. But the second time I saw it, knowing where it was going, I felt like I knew where the journey was going. So it was easier to go along with it. And that's one that like every year or two I'll watch. I'll just kind of throw it in and watch it. A couple of years ago, I watched it with my then 11-year-old son who got caught up in it and was just watching it with me. And it held his attention for 2.5 hours, which shocked me greatly because in this day and age of, YouTube shorts and TikToks and stuff like that, I was surprised that this movie held his attention. But every time I watch it, I find something different in it. And so that's 2001, but that is one of my favorites. But if that were on, I'd probably watch like 5-10 minutes of it and then realize, oh, I should start this over on a day when I have the time to enjoy it. Star Trek 5, if it can be anywhere in the movie, I will watch it. So,
right. Yeah, we all have those movies. So, are there any movies that you've watched recently that you've come to enjoy?
So as I've gotten older and I do look back a lot at the movies that I grew up with, there's a podcast that I follow. It's been on hiatus for a couple of years called Cherry Bombs. They look at movies that didn't do that well originally in theaters. They've covered like Howard the Duck, the original Dune from 1984. They've covered trying to think now that I it's been a while since I've listened to a lot of them because they've been on hiatus and I don't want to go back because I don't want to get caught up again. But Waterworld was a big one that they did, in Grease 2. I had never seen Grease 2. I did not look at Waterworld back in the 90s because I heard all this hype about how it cost $200 million and the critics were panning it before they even saw it and all of these things. And so I bought it recently and watched it down in my little studio and really enjoyed it because I had no preconceptions. I tried to get rid of what people, the adults, the critical critics of the time were saying about it and just enjoyed it for what it was. This movie from the 90s that, has pretty spectacular production value and Dennis Hopper chewing the scenery and Kevin Costner peeing into a bottle. Like, what more do you want in a movie? It tells an interesting story that you don't get anywhere else. And so that's one that I found an appreciation for after decades of listening or remembering the critics that were like, this is no good. And it's like, you know what? I disagree. I think, because I think as kids, we latched onto something. I saw Howard the Duck in theaters in 1986, thought this is pretty cool. It came out on video. I rented it a couple times. I enjoyed it. I had the 1986 Howard the Duck wall calendar like in my bedroom. And then it was like years later, people were like, oh, it was like the punchline to a joke for like what a bad movie was. But I also don't think it's really a bad movie. I think it's just something that's a little misunderstood. I think people maybe had weird expectations because it's, you know, from the guy who did Star Wars, and this is what he did post Star Wars was Howard the Duck. And so people are like, he's lost his mind. He doesn't know what he's doing anymore. Why did he produce this? And so if you listen to that kind of stuff, it can kind of taint how you see certain things. But if you watch something and you actually genuinely enjoy it, then that becomes part of who you are. The Star Trek V touches on that. You know, you don't take your pain away because you need it, because it informs who you become, because your experiences, everything that came before today is what got you to today. And so movies from my childhood, that's one of them that I have always maintained I thought was good. Cherry Bombs agreed with me. Another one that I've enjoyed that most people don't was the 1993 Super Mario Brothers live action movie with Bob Hoskins.
Right.
My biggest content with that, or my biggest point with that, is that if it wasn't called Super Mario Brothers, I think people would have gotten more enjoyment out of it. Calling it Mario, you expect a lot of things, and they disappoint when you have that expectation. But if it was just if that was just a big box office science fiction movie from the creators of Max Headroom and it wasn't connected to Mario, I think it's a pretty good story. This alternate place where the dinosaurs didn't die out and they evolved into, again, Dennis Hopper chewing the scenery as Koopa, as Bowser, and the Goombas with their weird little heads and stuff. Like, there's a lot to it that I think is very creative, very original. But when you start seeing it through the lens of the video games, you think, oh, they totally missed the mark. But if you take that element out of it, I think that it's a really good and interesting science fiction movie. There's a lot of comedy in it, and it tells a good story. And they obviously thought the same thing because they left it wide open for the sequel that never happened, just like Mac and Me. I wish that the movies that promised a sequel would at least get a few bucks to go and make it, or a YouTube short of it or something, because like they promised that they'd be back and they lied. So at least Star Trek kept returning sequel after sequel until number 6. But yeah. So yeah, those are the ones that I revisit, or where that have, from a kid into an adult, I've changed my opinion about it because I grew up and realized that nobody knows what they're talking about. You just have to trust your instincts when it comes to the stuff that you like.
Right. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, I don't agree with those movies, but of the movies you
very
mentioned,
few people do.
As of the movies that I agree with the sentiment, but of the movies you mentioned, like Waterworld was my jam. I absolutely love Waterworld when I saw it. But like with Howard the Duck and the other one you mentioned is like I watched them, and well, I didn't see Mac and Me, but I did see Howard the Duck, and I had extremely high expectations of it, and I was a little disappointed, right?
Right.
And like I watched Super Mario Brothers, and exactly what you said, I was expecting something akin to the video game, and I felt like I didn't get that.
Right.
So let's continue to talk about another movie that it will take some time for people to appreciate, and we're going to go to the opening credit and talk about Star Trek
Star Wars.
The Final Frontier. Within a buffer zone in space between two great galactic empires, there's a planet where the great powers of the Milky Way attempt to foster an attitude of peace. The dignitaries from 3 powerful governments have been taken hostage, and the Federation of Planets, one of these 3 great powers, sends their very best military officer to resolve the situation. Captain Kirk and his trusted and aging skeleton crew must take their barely functioning starship, the USS Enterprise, into uncertain danger. What this brave crew will come to realize is that there are plots within plots, and the situation is not what it seems. And their mission will be the venue to answering the question to one of life's greatest mysteries. This movie was released June 9th, 1989, produced by Paramount Pictures. It grossed over $52 million in the US and Canada on a reported budget of $27 million. And if you adjust that for inflation, that means it would have grossed $137 million if it were released today, and the budget would have been $71 million. And no matter how you slice it, that is kind of a flop. It's kind of flippity flopping on the budget front.
I'd say that is very true. And when I saw your stat that you're going to bring up that, I also did some research. Star Trek Nemesis, or Star Trek 10 is it basically is known. When that was released, it did $67 million worldwide, and adjusted for inflation, that's only $122 million. So Star Trek 5 still beats it, not the lowest grossing one. So it makes me feel better about my position. But I'm also certain that there are Nemesis fans out there that are like, hey, they take umbrage with that. But it's true. That's actually the lowest grossing one when it adjusted for inflation. So I was doing math on that earlier because I was very curious to see where that would fall within the Star Trek movies.
Right. So it's at least it held its own, and it probably did pretty good on the video market too. So
yeah, I would think so. Yeah.
Let's get into who was starring in this movie. Why don't you start us off?
All right. Starring William Shatner is Captain James Tiberius Kirk. He's from such things as Miss Congeniality, where he was insane, but I loved him in that. Showtime with Eddie Murphy. Dodgeball, a true underdog story. He was in Loaded Weapon 1, the spoof of the Lethal Weapon movies from one of the creators of Airplane. And of course, on classic TV, he played Denny Crane on Boston Legal. He was the titular character in TJ Hooker. And of course, he originated the role of Captain Kirk in the original Star Trek.
Yeah, he's been busy. Like he continues to be busy on television and sometimes in film. He's like 95 years old and he's still putting out content as they say, as the young people say. Like he's doing voices and he's doing spot, what do you call it, guest appearances and stuff like that. So he looks pretty good for his age. I mean, he's one of the best looking 95-year-old I've ever seen.
Yeah, he just turned 95 on the 22nd of March. I celebrate because, he's my captain, and he's had an amazing life. I've read a lot of the books that he's either written or quote unquote written / ghost written. Right. But he talks a lot about how Leonard Nimoy used to like to not have things scheduled so he could relax, and Shatner doesn't like to have holes in his schedule because he feels like if he has nothing to do, that's when he's going to die. So that's why he's always busy somewhere, because he thinks that that's keeping him alive. So that's an insight into him.
Right. That's amazing. Up next, we have Leonard Nimoy as Captain Shijin-Tagai Spock. Yes, I pronounced it. Suck it, Spock.
I saw that written here. I'm like, he'll always just be Spock to me, but I knew he had the full Vulcan name that was almost unpronounceable, as he has told people.
As he has said. Actually, the funny thing about that is that it was largely not canon and still hasn't yet been confirmed, like in a filmed sense. Like we haven't seen it on television or in the movies, but they did put out, like Strange New Worlds did put out a poster with that name. So I think that's as close as the canon as we need it to be.
Probably. Back in the 80s, Jane Wyman, who played his mama Amanda, was once asked at a convention, like, what's Spock's first name? And she said that it was Harold. So I don't know where she got that from, but I've always gone with that as canon. So
yeah, he has at least 3 different proposed first names.
This is like you say, the one that will probably make it into canon because it's been on promotional materials and whatnot. So I get that.
So that's probably one of my favorite things about Strange New Worlds.
All right. Well, we got DeForest Kelley as Dr. Commander Leonard Bones McCoy.
And then we have James Doohan as Captain Montgomery Scotty Scott.
We have Walter Koenig as Commander Pavel Chekhov.
We have Nichelle Nichols as Commander Nyota Uhura.
George Takei as Commander Hikaru Shulu.
And David Warner as St. John Talbot. And we've probably seen him, or you probably remember him from when he was in Tron or Titanic. And he's also been in The Mouth of Madness.
I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a movie called Time After Time that the director of Star Trek II, Nicholas Myers, wrote and directed. It came out in 1979. David Warner is in that, and he plays Jack the Ripper. The movie is about what happens when Jack the Ripper steals H.G. Wells' time machine and comes to 1979 San Francisco. The most chilling line is that he's watching the news and he tells H.G. Wells in 1979, all this stuff is going on. And he goes, in my time, I was a freak, and today I'm an amateur. Meaning that, violence has gone through the roof, and it's so chilling, but he's so great in that. So we have Lawrence Luckinbill as Sybok. He was in the movie Cocktail with Tom Cruise and the boys in the band.
Oh, okay. And up next is Charles Cooper. He plays General Cord, and you might have seen him in The Wrong Man or Blind Fury.
Charles Cooper was also in a couple episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, also playing a Klingon named Kempek. He ran the Klingon Council, and he's the one who turned his back on Worf over his father's discommendation. And so he has a Star Trek connection that would come, I think, after Star Trek 5. So that's the other thing I know him from.
Yeah, I remember him on those episodes, the Worf episodes. And
Yep. So Cynthia Gao is Caitlin Dar, and she's not really gone on to do a lot. I know that she went on, I think she was like a news anchor or a field reporter for like local news somewhere, and she's made a career out of that. And I think she's written a book or two as well. But on the screen, she's had like minor speaking parts or has been mostly an extra. And it's also rumored that her part as Caitlin Dar was actually dubbed over by another actress. That's not even her that we're hearing in the movie. She's just the face of the character for whatever reason. So
that's crazy. That's crazy if they did that. I mean, if she is a news anchor, then she can't have a bad voice.
Right. Well, and people have commented that the uncredited person that overdubbed her doesn't sound that far off from what her actual voice was. But here's the thing that really sucks is that she wasn't told this, and she found it out when she went to the premiere of the movie and watched it with the cast and crew and realized that was not her voice that was now in the movie. So
that's crazy, because the only thing I could think of is that they needed to do ADR and she wasn't available, and that's why they got somebody else. But apparently she was available and she wasn't told, and she only found out when she went to watch the movie. So that's crazy. That sounds like what's its name? David Prowl. Paul. Is it Prowl?
Oh, David Prowse. Darth Vader. Yep.
Yeah. That's his situation. But in his case, they planned it from the beginning. He's like, they just never told him.
I think the moral of that story is that they should have gotten James Earl Jones to come in and voice Caitlin Dar. That would have been a completely different spin on that character. So that would have been more fun.
That would have been excellent. Up next is Todd Bryant. He plays Captain Claw, and you might have seen him in Bloodwork or The Puppet Masters.
Spice Williams Crosby played Vixus, Claw's like right-hand woman. She was in Guyver and Reach Me. Both of those I'm not familiar with. I know she's also a stunt woman. I got to meet her once at a convention and marveled at how big her arms are and stuff. She's a weightlifter. She's a stunt woman. She's been around in a bunch of things, and super nice person. When I got to talk to her, she gave me like 20 minutes of her time to ask all sorts of fan questions of her. So I was always thankful that she was that gracious.
It's funny that you should say that she had big arm muscles, because that's precisely why Sulu and Chekhov are following her at the end of the movie. Yep.
Such wonderful muscles.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with most of her movies either, but I do know about Guyver. That is based on a Japanese. I think I want to say it started off as a comic, manga.
Yeah, manga. Yep,
yeah,
yep. Probably.
And then it transitioned to. It may have been an anime series, but then they did this live action where Mark Hamill has an appearance, but he's not like the main star. But like when you go and look at like the box art for the Guyver, they always put his face on it, even though he's not really the main character.
Right.
And it's basically a guy in a suit, and so that's why I'm familiar with it. I remember it was a big deal when I was growing up. I think it had to have been an anime is where I must have gotten familiar with it.
Possibly, yeah.
So then the final person that I have listed here is God in quotes. So
Right.
he's played by George Murdoch, and you might have seen him on Orange County or something called Breaker, and I'm not familiar with either of those.
He also has another side credit for Star Trek. He was Admiral J.P. Hansen in The Best of Both Worlds on The Next Generation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's the guy that dispatches the Enterprise to go check out the Borg, and then later says that, I have to mourn my friend because he's now, working for the enemy and stuff. And I think he was also the doctor on the original Battlestar Galactica, if I'm not mistaken. Not a big fan of that, but I think that was one of his credits at one point that I kind of remember for some reason.
So they brought him back. They were kind of filming both this movie and Star Trek at the same time, or Star Trek The Next Generation. So I was like, yeah, he's neat. They have swapped actors so many times. So.
Oh, yeah. So Star Trek V, directed by William Shatner himself, coming off the heels of Nimoy directing Star Trek 3 and 4. They had a what's called a favored nations clause in their contract. Whatever one of them got, the other one was also entitled to. So when Nimoy directed 2 and knocked those out of the park, Shatner was like, it's my turn. And Paramount agreed. He had directed a number of TV shows, and he's directed a movie called Groom Lake, which I have heard of but have never seen. I have a feeling it has something to do with Area 51. But it was Star Trek V that put him on the map theatrically. My opinion is I felt he did pretty good. But anyways.
Yeah. The studio is really concerned about the money. I don't know. I don't think that this is the type of movie that will crash a director's career. It flopped when it's called a flop. It flopped because it didn't make the marketing budget back. It did double the production budget, but didn't even quite reach the marketing budget. So I think this is the type of thing that if he wanted to direct again, I think he could have. But anyways, going back to the writer, again, William Shatner, Harv Bennett, and David Lowry. And Shatner, he also wrote Groom Lake, and it's the only other film that he's written, but he's also known for writing Star Trek novels, and he's had great success with a particular series called Tech War, and that actually went into like TV movies, TV series. It had a comic book. In the comics, there was a significant character in there, and they drew the character looking like Leonard Nimoy. So they had fun with that. I was really into Tech War. I'm not sure if he wrote it by himself or if he had a ghostwriter. When I first started reading it, I read it believing that he solely wrote that book, and I'll just, until I get new information, I'll live with that. But I thought it was pretty good. I was deeply into it. I love the mythology of Tech War, and I thought the TV series did a great job. They got the guy from a show called, I think it's called Chico and the Bear. I don't know. It's about a truck driver and a monkey. And I used to watch that show. So they got that same actor, and I watched that with the actor. So yeah, it was a very interesting experiment that they did.
Yeah. No, Tech War. I remember when that came on. I think that was the USA Network syndication type thing, and it was Greg Evigan was the guy that was in that. I only know Greg Evigan from My Two Dads and Tech War, and stuff. But yeah, I think I read the first Tech War book, and I don't remember much about it, but I remember that there was like a bunch of them that came out after that, and I've read some of his Star Trek novels that were co-written with Judith and Garfield Reeve Stevens, who are a favorite pair of novelists of mine. They're a husband and wife team that wrote a book called Prime Directive that's like pure poetry from beginning to end. And I had the Tech War comic, and I'm sure I still have it around here somewhere, but I have no idea where it's at. But now I want to pull it out to see which character looks like Nimoy, because that does sound like a lot of fun.
Yeah. And Bennett, he made a number of sci-fi TV movies. His only theatrical effort was for Star Trek movies. So The Wrath of Khan, The Search for Spock, and The Voyage Home, also known as the Genesis Trilogy.
The Genesis Trilogy. That's a good name for those three right there.
Yeah,
it's like a perfect trilogy of movies.
That's the first time I heard that, because I always knew that these three movies were connected. But then I was listening to a Star Trek podcast, and that's how they referred to it. I was like, oh my goodness, that makes perfect sense.
Right. Absolutely it does.
They could have just as easily called it the Spock trilogy. And some people suggested that this trilogy centers around Spock, but not necessarily. Like, it doesn't center around Spock until like he dies in the first one. And then maybe in the middle one, The Search for Spock, that's definitely his movie, even though he's not really in it. And then at the end of it, like The Voyage Home, that's not his movie. That's Kirk's movie. It doesn't revolve around him, although he's a significant part of it. So yeah, but they all revolve around. It's like a continuous story, starting and ending with Genesis. So that's a great story. That's a great name for this trilogy. Well, actually, It's more like Genesis and the aftermath of Genesis. And there's a lot of lore about that. I want to get into some unconfirmed lore about Genesis when we get down to talk about the movie. And then lastly, we have Laurie, and he's the most experienced of having scripts greenlit into movies from like between all of these writers. So you probably seen some of his movies like Dreamscape, Passenger 57, The Three Musketeers from 1993, Money Train, Lake Returns, and Obsessed. Tell us about the composer.
All right. So the legendary Jerry Goldsmith composed the music for this. I actually just did a deep dive into him for a show coming up in like 6 months. The Rambo, The Force of Freedom cartoon. They used his score for that. And of course, he did the music for First Blood and Rambo First Blood Part 2. He composed the music for Hoosiers and the Kevin Bacon movie Hollow Man, Along Came a Spider, The Mummy, Mulan. Like, he's been around. He's a force to be reckoned with. He did a bunch of other Star Trek ones after this one as well. Jonathan Frakes, when he directed Star Trek First Contact, just wanted to make sure he had Jerry Goldsmith on board with him for that movie as well. Guy was legendary. He was an icon. Planet of the Apes, bunch of other stuff. Supergirl, of course. And the band Hiroshima, the Japanese jazz pop music fusion band, also have the song "The Window" or "The Moon's a Window to Heaven." One of the set pieces of Star Trek V, where of course Uhura is trying to distract people by doing that spicy palm dance in the middle of the desert. The Moon's a Window to Heaven was written lyrics by John Bettis and music by Jerry Goldsmith. And this is their only credit that they have for being a composer in a film. I love the dreamy quality of that song. I own the soundtrack naturally, but I love that. Well, I have it on vinyl, I have it on cassette, and I have it on CD. So, well, so we can get into it later, but I have this weird collection of Star Trek V stuff because it was almost just like nobody collects Star Trek V stuff, and I'm like, challenge accepted. So I have it within inside of me as we record this right now. So but yeah, no, I love that song because it's very dreamy. It's very much a weird sort of like song to have in a Star Trek movie. I guess maybe no more weird than having Beastie Boys Sabotage in the more recent Star Trek movies, but I love that song in there. It kind of fits well. I've never understood if it's something that's supposed to be playing within the movie for those campers to hear, or if it's just for us, the viewers of the movie. But it's weirdly out of place, but it weirdly also works.
I don't know. I would not consider it out of place. I think that it's supposed to represent contemporary music of that time in the future. Like that's one of the things that people are listening to, because it's kind of unusual. Like at the time, like Hiroshima was a very big deal at the time they came out. They were on all of the talk shows performing their music. I think I saw them on the Arsenio Hall show. So and it's like for a moment in pop culture, they were something that everybody talked about. And this seems like the type of music that would be in the future. Like, especially if you ever watched the Buck Rogers TV show, or some other things that try to portray what music in the future would sound like. It really sounds corny, right? It's like they've always struggled with it. Like what Star Trek The Next Generation did is like they always went back a couple of centuries, and that's like they're listening to music in a classical period, and they rarely go into music it's like it would be ancient to them but contemporary for us.
Right.
So that's it for the opening credits. And I only have like one announcement really. So I was recently on Movie Lovers Unite with John D. Gregorio, and we talked about Edward Scissorhands, and that was the first time that I seen that movie. I wanted to see it for a long time, and I finally got to see it. So that was a great episode to record with him. That's Movie Lovers Unite. I also want to shout out, since you said you loved Cherry Bomb's podcast, and they talk about movies that have basically bombed at the box office. There's one movie called what's it called? See, this is my memory fading away again. It's called Not a Bomb Podcast. And I told you about this podcast and Correspondence before, but in Not a Bomb Podcast, they talk about movies that have bombed at the box office and whether or not these movies actually deserve to be a bomb. One time we talked about Masters of the Universe, and they loved that movie, and I hated that movie. It's like I hated it when it first came out, and I hated it when on the rewatch. And they enjoyed it because they loved the corniness of it, and to them it was a movie that was so bad it was good. So now that we've talked about the opening credits, let's move on to our favorite parts. So I try to figure out what like the themes of the movie might be, and watching this movie, I feel like one of the themes is like found family and the quality and the importance of your found family, and how loyalty and trust and betrayal kind of works into that experience, and then how our lives and experiences shape us, both the good and the bad things that happen in our lives. And then the influence of spiritual leaders. According to William Shatner, the film main plot themes and elements were inspired by the evangelicals, the televangelist movement of the late 1980s. And I remember getting caught up in the televangelist. I used to watch a bunch of them on a regular basis, or a semi-regular basis. So what do you figure? What strikes you as being the themes of this movie?
No, I think you hit it out of the park on that one. It's definitely about the bonds of our found family. You know, we watched for 20 plus years at this point, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, having their agreements or disagreements, treating each other like family. Spock and Kirk fighting it out in a mock time. McCoy constantly razzing Spock. But Spock and McCoy are kind of like brothers. You know that they love each other, and that's the only reason why they'll push each other's buttons. Because if the other one wasn't worth their time, they would just walk away and never acknowledge them. So they're definitely, they have that family dynamic between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. McCoy says it early on in the movie. What I can't figure out is we spend all this time in space, and then we get time off, and what do? We spend it with each other. And it's because they like each other enough as coworkers and friends that, they could be going off and doing other things. Spock could go to Vulcan. McCoy could, go to Georgia or go visit his daughter. And I don't know what Kirk would be doing without the other two, to be honest, probably getting into trouble. But the fact that they have all this time together, and then they tether themselves to each other on shore leave when they could do anything else, it really shows that they have that bond, that they think of each other as family. and that that they wouldn't want to be with anybody else because they obviously have other options that they could have done. The idea too of Sybok being a spiritual leader and based on like your Jerry Falwell or your Jim and Tammy Faye Baker people, I can definitely see that influence in there. It's very much of that time, which is one of the reasons I actually like the movie, because Sybok is not as one-dimensional as I think he can kind of appear on the surface. He has these weird roots of being, well, you know, fully Vulcan, but rejecting a lot of the emotionless stuff that Spock has always strived to achieve. You know, he's half human, but he's always wanted to purge that human half. And now he has this full-blooded half-brother that's like, you know, no, man, let's not do that. Like, let's go have fun. Let's go and seek these things. Let's look for emotion and these experiences, and let's go look for our this spiritual being that's in the middle of the universe or the galaxy. And so Sybok is literally everything that Spock isn't. And so there are these like weird opposites there. But I think that there's a lot of nuances to Sybok, you know, what he's looking for, the way he's going about it. His charisma is definitely like the televangelist kind of thing where they're like, you know, come along with me on this journey. We're in it together. I feel that with Sybok, that's actually true. Whereas the televangelist, it really was. And a lot of those guys had that downfall of, you know, having extramarital affairs or realizing that the money being donated wasn't going to the things that they wanted you to believe that they were going to. But Sybok is very, very sincere in his belief that he's heard from God that he needs to hijack a starship and he needs to go through the barrier. And then he'll get whatever message he's been heading his entire life towards at that point. And I don't think he's the bad guy. He's just misguided because he has this belief that is unshakable, which not a lot of people really have these days. And he knows what he's doing is correct. The way he goes about it, maybe not right. Maybe he could have chartered somebody to go through the barrier at some point on some other ship or made some arrangements or done something in the name of science or something to get through that barrier. But he's very sincere. He believes he's doing the right thing and he's not a bad guy. He's just misdirected, you know. I've always liked him for that. And your theme of how our experiences shape us, I wholeheartedly believe in, you know, everything that I've gone through as a human being, everything you've gone through as a human being has brought you to this point today. And the way that we experience life and we make decisions going forward is informed by the things that we've done before. Our mistakes, hopefully we're learning from them, and the places where we don't know where we're going or what the correct decision is, we just kind of have to guess based on what we've done in the past. And so I don't think that this is any different. And Kirk definitely hits it on the head where he refuses to give up the pain that he's had, because the good, the bad, the ugly, all these things make us who we are. I've had some experience with this in my life with my ex-wife. She didn't like Star Trek. And so I kind of try to subdue that or kind of put it away and think, well, maybe, you know, if I don't have somebody to share this with, maybe this isn't as great as I thought or whatever. And when I put that kind of piece of myself away, I didn't really like that, because I felt like that had always been like my rock. It was where I went to in times of needing some comfort. You know, bad times are happening, I'll put on The Next Generation. I'll watch some favorite episodes. It'll be great. It'll be a distraction. And when I found myself without that, I didn't really feel like I was me at that point. And I even told her, I said, you know, I'm going to go back to being me, because you fell in love with me for who I was. And part of who I was that. And, you know, I think she got it. She didn't really ever enjoy it with me. My wife now has watched the last 4 or 5 seasons of Deep Space Nine with me. And she really liked Worf and his dry wit. So she got into it because of that, but she would never go to a convention. She can't remember most of the character names. I'll talk about the show we watched, and she's like, was that with the bald guy? I'm like, there's 2 bald guys. Be more specific.
what are some of your favorite parts of the movie?
Let me tell you this. Let me kind of change one thing real quick. Here's why I like Star Trek V, because to me, the whole thing is a favorite part, but for various reasons. Here's how I look at Star Trek V. Here's why I think it's kind of maligned. I think it's because we had Star Trek the Motion Picture, which was loved because it was the first Star Trek in 10 years, well, 5 years since the animated series, and people were just hungry to see what their crew was up to and with a movie budget, what it would look like. And then you had Star Trek II, which was this, brinksmanship between Kirk and Khan and Spock dying and all these elements coming together. You had Star Trek III, which a lot of people kind of agree suffered from being shot on a sound stage rather than out in the wild somewhere for Genesis and those things. And I actually think that's a really smart movie, too, because it took 90 minutes to bring Spock back from the dead. And I feel like it did a lot. And it gave us Christopher Lloyd as a Klingon. So, and then they let loose with Star Trek IV, the most financially adept movie of the original series. It made like $109 million or something like that when it was originally released in 86. And so it did really, really well. So Star Trek V, if that had been the first Star Trek movie, maybe to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the cancellation of the series, and they were like now back, I have a feeling that would have been received a little bit better because you wouldn't have had the heavier stuff in between the original series and this, because I believe those first four movies kind of changed the characters and aged them, obviously. What I think Star Trek V does is it feels like it's a long version of an original Star Trek episode. It feels like more of an extension of that than an extension of Star Trek 2 or 4 or Star Trek 1. So that's why I love it. I can look at it and think if the movie was recut and the sound, the soundtrack was a little bit different and it had a little bit of a different flow, it would feel like it had maybe not come out of the 60s, but would have come out of that same vein as the original show. A lot of what I like about it is I like the humor in it. It might be kind of juvenile, but there's like wordplay in there. There's Shatner's known for being a guy who loves puns. And so it's not surprising that you have things like marshmallow in there, and stuff like that. But the movie to me feels like it's fun. It kind of has that easygoing kind of feel of some of the more relaxed episodes of the original series, like I Mutter Trouble with Tribbles, where it's about telling a good story, but about doing it with like sort of a wink and a nod to the audience. And I feel like that's what they were going for. I feel like Star Trek V is more akin to the original series than the four movies that came before it. So when you judge it through the lens, coming back to how we look at how our experiences shape us, I think when you look at it as like, oh, Star Trek IV, the one with the whales, it was so great and they saved the Earth and there's this time travel and there's all this stuff and it reached this broad audience. I think that kind of set up the expectations too high for almost no matter what Star Trek V would have been. And so this movie comes out, it comes out in the middle of 1989, in June of 1989. Other things that had come out around that same time were Ghostbusters 2, Batman, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Dead Poets Society, the Hulk Hogan movie, No Holds Barred came out at that point. And so every week there's like 2 or 3 movies being released that are all trying to get that screen time. And then Batman came out and it was like game over at that point for everything else. But by that point, like people were just looking at like, I think Star Trek V when it came out was the #1 movie the week that it came out and then was not the week after that. Right. And a lot of movies had that. Batman didn't. Batman was #1 and kind of fluctuated for a while, but so Star Trek V sort of gets lost in the shuffle of that, but I think the expectations were just so high. If it had been Star Trek V, the one with the other whales or something, like if it was a continuation, if there was a whale trilogy out there, I don't know, maybe it would have done better. Right. But so that's what makes it enjoyable for me. So the stuff that I really like, I find it really quotable. You have other movies that like Rocky has Adrian and you have Citizen Kane that has Rosebud and you have, I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse from The Godfather. But I think asking, what does God need with a starship? I think it's a great movie line that people just dismiss. And I think it's just kind of cheeky and weird. And William Shatner delivers it with almost like a, I don't or kind of gusto, like he's just lobbing stuff off, and I think he had a good time while he was making this movie, and I think that kind of shows. Nimoy, as well as doing Spock. Spock has his moments of being serious, but he also sort of has these moments of being almost restrained but carefree. I don't know how to describe it. You watch his performance; it's different than it is in like Wrath of Khan or even Star Trek 4.
Well, he's more relaxed, I think.
Yeah.
That's what it is. He's not.
I think
the stick is not as far up his butt as
in
some other movies.
I think that's a fair assessment, and I think that the cast, who didn't really know what to expect as Shatner as a director, I think they found themselves having a good time despite their preconceptions as well, and a lot of that shows. Nichelle Nichols doing her dance out in the desert. James Doohan hitting his head on the thing after saying he knows the ship
like the back of his hand.
You got it. And yeah, and it might be a stupid slapsticky kind of thing, but you know what? I love it. And you know what? James Doohan, I don't know how hard he hit his head on that pylon, but I believe it. When you hear that thud, he falls down and they pull back, and it's not a stuntman that made that fall. It was, 60-something-year-old James Doohan. I believe that like he's knocked himself out, and right. There's like that also that weird sort of thread of like Uhura and Scotty possibly having something going on. It's like, give me a movie where we explore what they did on their shore leave, like that's an odd couple that wasn't really telegraphed before that, but like I'd be down to see why like suddenly there is this thing. And I don't know, it's just there's just some stuff in there that I think is just sort of different, quirky, and offbeat. It's got different types of humor, the slapstick and word stuff, and I think it can cater to some people, but I think it can also alienate them, because you're like, oh, Scotty would know better his shit better than this. He wouldn't have had that happen. And just there's some things like that.
Yeah, it's funny. Now I want to go back to what you were saying about if this movie was like the first Star Trek movie and not really coming after Star Trek 4, then it would have been, I think, I agree, it would have been a lot better received. People would have had a lot better time with it because they didn't have any other expectations. And I remember I kind of expressed that with the people at Not a Bomb podcast. So they did an episode of Star Trek 5, and there were 3 people that were talking about the movie. Neither one of them were big Star Trek fans. And so they didn't know what to expect. A lot of them either had watched Star Trek, but really didn't have any clear memories of it. I'm not talking about like the TV series, but I'm talking about the Star Trek movies. Like one guy, he said he had seen some of the Star Trek movies, but he couldn't tell you the difference between one movie and the other. And they all kind of merged together. And then, in their conversation, and they talked about Star Trek 5, they talked about how they really liked it and they didn't understand why it didn't do as well as the earlier movie, or the fan the resistance to this movie.
Right.
And I had actually wrote them a letter, and I kind of explained to them, well, the thing is that this came after such other great Star Trek movies. Like it's like Star Trek 1, exactly as you said, it was something people had seen Star Trek in a long time, so they would have watched anything. Like if Kirk had went into the bathroom taking a dump and then walked out, and that was the whole movie, we were like, yeah,
he's back.
We would have.
That was the captain's log,
right? we would have loved it, and then. And it was all right, but it wasn't like the success that they wanted to be. And, it was, they had put a lot of money into it. So for the next movie, they cut the budget and they greenlit the sequel. And that was like one of the best movies ever made. So, and then, and they kind of continue with that. Like even Star Trek 3 isn't as bad as, like people say that, the rumor going that the conventional wisdom that the odd number Star Trek movies are the bad movies, and Star Trek 3 isn't really bad. It's not that bad. It's just not as good as Star Trek 2 because we're comparing the movies to each other and not to the wider range of entertainment. And not even Star Trek 5 is that bad, but it's like when you compare it to Star Trek 4, you're like, man, this is kind of a letdown because Star Trek 4 was so good, right?
Right.
It's like Star Trek 5 had humor, but so did Star Trek 4. And it's like in some cases it was a lot funnier because you got Spock playing basically the man out of time, learning how to be Spock again, and then asking some very obvious questions. And then like one of the things that happens that he's confused about cursing, and Kirk tries to teach him what cursing is. And then when Spock curses, it feels inappropriate, so it's funny in its inappropriateness. And so they kind of in this movie they had added I'm not saying that they added humor, but they had humor, and the humor was good, but I think in some estimations just was not as good, right? So that is what you're comparing it against, and that's why there was a kind of backlash to the film. But if this was the first Star Trek movie and how it kind of adheres to like, because I feel like I feel like it might not be a great movie, but it certainly is a really good episode of Star Trek. So if this was the first Star Trek movie, it would have been outstanding. We would have a very different opinion of it because we had nothing else to compare it to but the TV show or perhaps Star Trek The Next Generation. I mean, not even that because that wasn't out yet. As a matter of fact, the reason that Star Trek The Next Generation was ever made was because of Gene Roddenberry's experience on Star Trek 1.
Right. Yeah.
We have the producers of Star Trek 1 and actually probably Gene Roddenberry's own hubris. We have him to thank for him getting, basically he got kicked out of the Star Trek movies and he created his own Star Trek on television. So, I agree with all of those points.
Well, I'll tell you too, part of my enthusiasm for Star Trek 5. So I remember the day that I went to go and see Star Trek 5. It was a Saturday because that's when I did everything in the 80s. I had a friend that was over and my mom was like, hey, Star Trek 5 is out. She had taken me to see all the others starting with number 2. I was too busy being 3 years old when the motion picture came out. So I never saw that one on the big screen. So she's like, hey, you and your friend, you're here. There's a new movie theater in Marina Del Rey. It's an AMC theater. We had never had an AMC theater. She had heard that it was a good experience and it just opened. She's like, Star Trek's out. Let's go see it. I said, great. She was immediately pissed off when she said 2 kids and 1 adult for Star Trek 5. It was a matinee and they're like $21. She's like, what? Because matinees cost like $2.50 at that point and kids were generally cheaper. So she's paying $7 a ticket for 3 people to go and see the movie. She's immediately pissed off. They were selling merchandise in the theater lobby. I still have it to this day. There's a little like Starfleet Delta, like the arrowhead that had turquoise and it said Star Trek 5 in it. And she bought that for me. I don't think my friend got anything at that point, but she bought that for me. We went and saw the movie. And then when we came out, she was even more mad that she had spent $21 to go see, quote unquote, that movie. So I sensed at that point she didn't enjoy it. I liked it because it was Star Trek. It was the big screen. It was the first movie in 3 years at that point. It was like one of the longer gaps in there because the Genesis trilogy, every 2 years, like clockwork, they were coming out. And now this was a 3-year gap for this. And so, but I remember enjoying it. I actually, when I realized that there was a novelization by J.M. Dillard, that there was a book version, I stole quarters from my mom's laundry fund to go off and buy it at a discount bookstore because I could get it for like $4 or whatever it was. And I just paid all in quarters and I got it and I read that thing. And there's a lot of weird information in there about Sybok's past and the idea that the marshmallow that Spock studied campouts and like got that wrong. It's because Dr. McCoy had reprogrammed the computer. He took out the word marshmallow and replaced it with marshmallow because he knew Spock was going to research the campfire ritual. So he wanted to screw him over somehow. And that's how he did it. So not in the movie, obviously, but that was this weird, like elaborate joke from Dr. McCoy. So I saw it like that. Flash forward 1991, I'm living in a different place. We had cable for the first time in my life, and we didn't have the upper channels like HBO or Showtime or any of those. but you could still tune it to those channels and you couldn't see the picture. It was wavy and distorted and everything else, but the audio was intact. And I happened to tune in, and Star Trek 5 was on, and I was doing stuff in my house. My parents were out and about. I was like 15, so I was just alone in the house, and I was just listening to the dialogue of Star Trek 5 and the way the movie was unfolding, and I really just dug it at that point. Excuse me. About a year after that, my mom had come into a little bit of money. We had been struggling financially. She came into a little bit of money. She's like, I'd like to go and get you a little something because like we haven't been able to buy anything in a long time. And we went to a grocery store. And at that point on VHS, I only had Star Trek 2 and 4. And we were at a supermarket that had like a shipper with like all 5 of the movies at that point. Actually, it was 1991. So, only the 5 movies were there. And my mom was like, which one don't you have? I said, no, I don't have 1, 3, and 5. And she goes, well, pick one. And so I was trying to figure out of those 3, like what I'd want. And so I picked out 3 and she's like, do you want the other 2? And I said, yeah, but it seems like that'd be like $30 worth of movies at that point, like $10 a piece. She goes, no, just go ahead and get them. So that night, I think we got like fast food somewhere and I watched Star Trek, the motion picture, which I think was the first time I actually had ever saw it or at least paid attention to it. And then I immediately put in Star Trek 3 after that. And that's when my mom checked out and went to bed. And it's like 1 a.m. by the time that's done. And I watched Star Trek 5 right after that. And I watched the odd numbered trilogy there. And well, they don't connect in any way, shape, or form. I loved each one of them for a different reason. And so that I think became this weird thing of like, I had the most experience with Star Trek 5. And so I loved it. And then a lot of time went by after that. Didn't think about it much, would watch the movies every now and then from like beginning to end with, all of them in there. And then a number of years ago, the Cherry Bombs did their episode about Star Trek 5. It's actually, they released that right after they did this crossover episode with me. And they had talked to me about it when we recorded, saying, oh yeah, the next one now it's going to be about Star Trek 5. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't wait. That thing is like a 2.5 hour beast of an episode that is just fantastic. They get to a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, the press conference where Shatner can't remember Walter Koenig's name and introduces him as the gentleman who plays Chekhov. And, and this is in front of the press. Like the reporters from around the world are there and he can't remember Walter Koenig's name. It's hilarious. But listening to that episode made me realize that, like, you know what? I love this movie too. And I remember coming home and watching it and was like, I don't think that they brainwashed me. I think they just sort of awoke like my inner enthusiasm for it. And then it was not long after that, I decided that I wanted to put together a weird Star Trek 5 collection because nobody on the face of the earth would do this kind of thing. It's mostly media stuff, a couple of the posters. My favorite is the teaser poster that has a movie theater with a seatbelt on it in space. And it says, why are they putting seatbelts in theaters this summer? It's because Star Trek 5 was going to be so exciting that you'd have to be restrained. So, so I think I had this weird relation to it because it came at me at different points in my life. And the Cherry Bombs are the ones that really revive those feelings of like, this, I don't think it's terrible. I don't think it's the best. I also have a very soft spot for Star Trek Generations, a movie that most other people don't seem to like either, but I could talk about that as enthusiastically as The Final Frontier.
Right. My own dissatisfaction with Generations was I wish that Kirk had a better death. That's all.
Right.
I mean, it's that and what they did with like Guinan's species. I feel like it could have been I expected more because it's like in Next Generation, the TV show, there was a lot of mystery behind her species, like her background. And the same way with Yoda, well, we see Yoda and we see members of his species, but his species is never named. And then there came an edict from on high to saying, to telling other writers and screenwriters, you can never name his species, right? So,
Right.
so there's that. And now it's almost like to the point where I don't want to know, because now if you tell me, there's going to be a certain amount of disappointment about
Right.
it. So what
Right.
happened with Generations, one of the things they wanted to do was they wanted to uncover the mystery of Guinan by introducing more members of her species. But then in that, there's kind of a disappointment, because you're like, is that all there is?
Right.
Well, with the things that certain things that happen in this movie, you know, I had certain questions, right? One of the things that had shocked me when I first, it's in the opening scene in the movie where Sybok is talking to this desert wanderer, and he reveals himself as a Vulcan, and he starts laughing. And I'm like, and this is me back then watching it in the theater. Back then I'm looking at it, it's like, that ain't right. Vulcans ain't supposed to laugh. And at the time I didn't get it. It's like, Sybok is a freak. He's not following Vulcan philosophy. So, but another thing that I thought was great was that, and I didn't catch it when I watched it originally, because I guess I believe that, well, everybody can fly a spaceship, but flying a spaceship is a thing that it's a skill. It's something that you have to be taught to do, and not everybody can do it well. But this, I believe, is the first time we see Uhura piloting a spaceship, and in this case, a shuttlecraft. And so when I watched it this time, I was like, oh, okay. And I think this is probably the most beefed up role that she's had in any of the original series. So in that, I can appreciate it, because she kind of had more of a, I want to say, a cerebral role in Star Trek 6. But in this role, I feel like she's doing a lot more. And as far as action, like she had her thing with, I mean, still not a lot, but she had her thing with Mr. Scott. And then she had the thing where she's, the dancing thing that everybody remembers.
Yeah.
And then she's flying the shuttle. She feels more integral. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair too. Gene Roddenberry back in the 60s wanted Uhura to, they wanted to have some sort of story where she had to take over commanding the Enterprise, and the standards and practices person at the time said, you can't do that because we can't have a woman in charge of the men, and we can't have a black woman in charge of the men. So yeah, they did do it in the animated series though, where the guys were under the spell of like a siren type alien, and all the women were not affected. And Uhura was the highest ranking officer, and she got to command the Enterprise for the animated episode.
Right. I remember that. I hadn't watched that episode yet. I'm slowly working my way through that series. And I'm going to, there's a point, I actually watched that one episode of that before I watched Star Trek 5. And it's a very particular thing that happened that I'm going to get to. But, yeah. And one of the other points that I thought about this, that I didn't catch it when I first watched it, but this time when I watched it, I was like, Uhura's got some nice legs.
This is true.
Yeah. It's
this is true.
Yeah, she probably not as in great shape as she was in the 1960s, but she definitely, she's not skipping leg day. She must have been like maybe 50 years old when she did this movie. So she had not skipped leg days. I wish even though she had greater input in this movie, I feel like they could have did more with that.
Yeah. I wish that they had done more for Uhura in any of the movies. Honestly, Star Trek 4 sort of set the precedent of, well, Star Trek 3, I think, set the precedent of the people that weren't Kirk, Spock, and McCoy having something to do. In Star Trek 3, she is able to subdue the one guy and get the crew onto the Enterprise so that they can steal and get out of space dock. In number 4, she and Chekhov go and get the nuclear energy off of the Enterprise naval carrier, and in this, she, like you say, she gets to pilot the ship and the shuttle, and she does the fan dance. She has her brief fling with Scotty, and will keep Chekhov and Sulu's secret that they can't find their way out of a forest. So,
yeah,
she had something to do there. Yep.
Yeah, I remember that now. Also, this is outside of her. This is a very specific scene. This is when they had to rescue the hostages, and Captain Kirk and the crew were like actually in the compound. They're fighting and everything. Captain Kirk is attacked by this cat woman with 3 titties, and
Yep.
somebody in the design crew watched Total Recall. So she jumps on him.
Actually, Total Recall came out a year later.
Oh,
It came out in
really?
summer of
Oh, okay.
1990.
So Total
Yep.
Recall got the idea from this movie.
Yep.
So she jumps on him. He throws her in a shallow like pool of water, and then she stays there. I'm like, really? That's it? What kind of alien this is? Is she allergic to water? She just went into the water and passed out, or did she go into water and instantly drown? That seems crazy because nobody pulled her out. So,
right. Well,
and I feel like she's a air breathing alien, or maybe she has gills on her in her face because she is an alien. So maybe she's just knocked out. We don't get any more information. I would have appreciated some more elaborate expertise on why you can just throw in some water and she's out.
well, and true with that too. It's like, cats famously don't get along with water, so maybe there's some with that. But Kirk basically just throws her in there. She seems like she's floating face up, like you would in a pool if you were dead. So Kirk just cold-bloodedly murdered somebody and then moves on with the rest of the story without any acknowledgement.
Well, I don't want to say that he cold-blooded. He was defending himself. So it wasn't in cold blood. You could say that he didn't do any move to like make sure that she was all right or try to rescue her. But then he's just assuming that she's fine.
Well, so
that's something for a court martial to decide.
I was going to say there should have been Star Trek 6 where her people like came after him to hold him accountable for this moment in the same way that like the fight between I think it was Zod and Superman and Man of Steel like took out a bunch of innocent people, and they've like addressed that in like sequels and stuff, or tried to.
Yeah, absolutely. They had an opening. There was a trial in Star Trek 6. So during the trial, they could have brought up the alien as a witness. Like, yes, he murdered my sister. He threw her in water. He should have known that her anatomy could not handle that much water.
And then you cut to that guy and you see him immediately like cleaning his paws. So what's funny about Total Recall when you brought that up is that the 3-boobed alien in that was played by an actress named Lycia Naff, who was also in Star Trek The Next Generation. She played Ensign Sonia Gomez. And so it's a weird connection to like Star Trek all through everything I watch. I always try to find those weird connections. But she was the 3-boobed alien in that one. She was supposed to be a mutant in that. So I think that explains that. The 3-boobed Catwoman, I'm not quite sure of because she had a tail and everything. It was exotic, I guess, for Star Trek.
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody's seen that before. So, because they have cat aliens in Star Trek in the animated series.
Oh, yeah.
You see, there's a cat alien, but this can't be the same species because the one that they had in Star Trek had the correct amount of titties. But it could be that this was a mutation that this other woman have, and it's like a rare mutation, or maybe it's a common mutation that she had 3 breasts instead of 2. So it's like, these are questions that need to be answered, need to be explored. There needs to be some fan fiction written about this. Also, another part that I really, one of the funnier parts is when Sybok successfully commandeers a shuttlecraft and has Sulu fly to the Enterprise. Now, these are some of the weaker parts of the story because the shuttlecraft is a military vessel going into another military vessel. And there are several points of which there ought to be contingency plans to dealing with situations precisely like this. So that you don't have an enemy taking over you like souped up to the gills, heavily armed, like can render destruction on a planetary scale just by itself. Spacecraft. Like, you don't want just anybody having your spacecraft. And this is like the 15th time Kirk lost control of the Enterprise. It's amazing that he maintains his rank as well as he has. I mean, he's already been demoted once. I'm surprised they hadn't demoted him a couple more times. So, but anyway, besides that, and they're telling, because of the threat that's of the Klingon spacecraft, they just can't land the shuttlecraft in the Enterprise as normal. So
Right.
What I really liked about it is like
the shields are up, so they can't go through the shields because they would basically deflect them. So they have to lower them for a split second and crash,
and then raise them, and they can't use the tractor beam. That basically they have to land the shuttlecraft in their Enterprise without the tractor beam. It's funny, right? Because when they said that, it reminded me of Battlestar Galactica when they were kind of doing the same thing, and they were making a big deal about it, about not being able to land the Vipers in the Galactica without some kind of tractor beam or something like that.
Oh wow!
At that point, well, in Galactica, it wasn't a tractor beam. It was more like they would wirelessly connect their fighter craft to the Galactica, and then somebody on board the Galactica would fly the fighter craft in, and the pilot wouldn't have to do anything. That somebody else is flying the ship.
Okay,
but
like a remote sort of thing or something.
Right. But Admiral Adama was like, "No, we're not doing that. The pilots are going to fly their own ships into the shuttlecraft because he didn't want to use wireless networks on the Galactica." So this is kind of like the same thing where they're going to have to wirelessly fly the shuttlecraft into the Enterprise. It's not something that's normally done. It's very dangerous. And they had to use code words. So I guess the Klingons wouldn't figure out what they were doing. And they didn't have that procedure set up. You would think they would have that procedure set up so they could at least say in code exactly what Captain Kirk wanted to do with the Enterprise. So what was funny is that Sybok asking Sulu, "Have you done this before?" And he said, "Actually, this is my first time."
I love that, and I love the pullback of like Shatner looking at TK, and TK does this weird thing where he sort of like looks at his board and then like looks up at him. It's this like weird sort of look, but it works because it's like you can tell that they were trying to tell some parts of this is serious and some parts of it is like not. I think a lot of it was just to shake Sybok's confidence that they were gonna make it onto the ship and stuff. So but I love that. I love that shot.
Right. That was excellent. And so you had the commotion. They land the shuttle. They get out, and you have Spock. At the end of the struggle, he's able to get Sybok's gun, and he has Sybok's to bear, but he doesn't shoot him. And then it's revealed that Sybok is Spock's natural half brother, and there are a number of problems with this.
Right.
So one of them is that this non-disclosure doesn't make any sense. At least after you've done anything professional, after you've been in the military, there's a certain thing where if you're on an assignment or you're on a mission in the military or whatever, and you've got some personal connections with something, whatever's going on with the mission, they usually remove you from the mission because your personal connection might compromise your performance. And this is exactly what happens in the film. Like Spock finds out that the person that takes the hostages, like early on in the film, he finds out it's Sybok, and he knows exactly who Sybok is at that moment. So at any time he could have disclosed to Captain Kirk, "Okay, that's my brother. Maybe I shouldn't be on this mission," or "That's my brother, and this could cause problems with the mission if he sees me," or something like that. But he doesn't make the disclosure. So I guess it can be explained away is that because he's half human, he's doing the human thing and hiding things from his captain.
Right.
So that he can participate in the mission, because he knows that if he doesn't tell Captain Kirk about his familial connection, then he knows that he can stay on the mission. And then he says, Captain asks him, "Why didn't you tell me that he was your brother?" And Spock says, "Well, I didn't think it was important. It wasn't pertinent." But it's absolutely pertinent. Like, that's kind of a bullshit answer. So then we have Spock. Maybe he's not lying, but he's exaggerating again.
Right. That's true. Well, Spock didn't want to admit it because he realized that if he was taken off the mission, he's out of the movie at that point. So he's got to keep a lid on it to get to the end. So...
But we'll talk about some of the other problems with Spock being related to Sybok later.
I was going to say, if you didn't like the fact that he had a brother, you're going to really hate the fact that he has a secret sister too.
Oh, no, there's so many. Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about. There are so many secret relatives. We had them exploring their pain. There's some neat trivia about
DeForest Kelly and his scene and the famous speech by Kirk that everybody remembers where he needs his pain. When I watched it in the theater, I remember that was kind of corny, but I have a greater appreciation for it now. Or at least I developed a greater appreciation for it over the years because of my life experiences.
Right.
Because like when I first saw it, I had hardly any experiences. When you're going through life, you're like, okay, I get that. It's like he was saying that for the adults.
Right. Well, it's funny that scene with I was thinking this today. We see that, you know, Spock's pain is that his father never really accepted him, even from like birth, and McCoy losing his father and having to go through that. And we don't see what kind of pain like Kirk is holding on to, which makes me wonder, like, if he had been like, okay, sure, I'll be part of your cult, what would they have explored? Like the loss of Edith Keeler or something else from his past that we either know about or don't know about? There's a backstory to Captain Kirk that they mention in the episode The Conscience of the King from first season. It's like one of the first dozen episodes. And they mentioned something that they never go back to in Star Trek. And I don't know why they've never explored it. Maybe they're trying to figure out like it never existed. But there's this backstory that there was a colony that had a food shortage, and Kirk was there at the time as like a kid. There's a food shortage on this colony, and the Governor Kodos, has to decide who's going to live and die. So if they kill people, they can stretch the food for a longer period of time. And so you would think that would be like this terrible thing that he had to go through, like maybe hiding from the authorities trying to take him out. Who knows what that story really was? I know that they explored it more in like one of the Star Trek books and stuff, but those aren't official, so who cares?
Right.
But that's like memory beta non-canon type stuff. So it doesn't hold a place. But the idea that he was there in this colony with this food shortage is established canon in Kirk's past, and they've never done anything more with it than this like offhanded remark. So maybe there's something there that he would have explored, or maybe Kirk, I don't know, took food from somebody to survive, or had to be in the middle of somebody else that had food when somebody else didn't. Who knows what it would have been? But I came back today I wonder what his pain would have been had they revealed it. Was it regret over not knowing his son better before he was killed, or not making more of an attempt to be with like Carol Marcus to, you know, raise their son together? You know, like, I don't know. I've always been curious about what his secret pain would have been, and they did a damn good job of keeping it secret after that movie. So yeah, who knows?
I think that was a smart choice, keeping it secret. But at the same time, they may have been alluding to him losing his son. I think that was in Star Trek 3. So that's the most pain that we've ever seen Kirk in. And that's probably like the best acting that he's done as Captain Kirk. And throughout all of the movies, you see him when he's hit by the news, and it's like he's given the news dispassionately from what's her name?
Sybok.
Yeah. So he's given that news, and he falls. It's like he's backing up. I don't know if he's attempting to sit down, or if he's even aware that there's a chair behind him, but he kind of falls down.
Yep.
And he ends up in his chair. And it's like the emotion that goes through his face before he starts shouting at the Klingon captain. And that was amazing. So if they're talking about like secret pain, I think that would probably be it if they had gone ahead and revealed that. And the thing about him being on that colony, was that when he was a lieutenant, or was that when, like, before he joined Starfleet? I can't remember. I feel like he was like a young lieutenant, or
I have a feeling. So when he was a young lieutenant, he was supposed to do a ship called the Farragut, and they explore like his guilt over his captain dying in the episode Obsession for this colony. I sort of think it's been a while since I've looked at like the Star Trek chronology, but I want to say it happened when he was more of like a teenager before he went into Starfleet. So he would have been like surviving. I don't know where his parents were during this time in this timeline. But yeah, I think it was supposed to have been when he was like 13, 14 years old or something like that. And yeah, it's like mind-boggling that he would go through something that traumatic and that stressful, and then they never bring it up again after that.
Right. Also, so here's the thing about some of this. The going through the barrier, I wish they had did something more with that. That's always bothered me. It bothered me then, it bothered me now, because they build it up as a big thing, as that it's impossible to go through the barrier. And then they just sailed through the barrier. I was like, where's the difficulty? It's like, this doesn't seem like a problem. They just literally just flew right into it. And it's like, they lost their senses for a bit, and then it came back and they saw a planet. They didn't have to look past, because it's like, I imagine at the center of the galaxy, there's a lot to it. Now, obviously, they did not know about supermassive black holes at the time, so there was none of that there. And when you consider the center, like, how big a circumference are we talking about? So they're probably at like the very edge of what might be considered the center, so still very far away from what would be the galactic center where the black hole is. And then they immediately find the planets. Like, so a lot of this doesn't add up, and I wish that there was there was more context to it, that they had a more of a problem going to the barrier, or maybe or that even Sybok knowing that God was there. Like, there are people who believe that there was a planet at near the center, or at the center of the galaxy, or past the galactic barrier, that people knew it, but it was more like a religious belief than more like actual knowledge. And Sybok seemed to have actual knowledge. So I'm thinking maybe it could have been something like the being that we eventually meet on that planet, Shakari, like, he found a way to reach out to someone who was psychic, and then, or had telepathic abilities, and reached out to Sybok, and that's why Sybok had this obsession with getting with Shakari, and that and that he knew that only a starship could get through the barrier, like a military grade starship, and that he knew that like there was a secret path, like a secret some kind of warp corridor that they could go through, that could get past the barrier, that's only open during certain times of the year, and like, this is the only time that they could get through the barrier, and then they could get through. That's why he was so desperate to do it at this point and this time, and he didn't have time to like charter a shuttle or something like that, or maybe he attempted it and nobody was willing to try it, or whatever. Like, he figured it, he got a psychic message from quote unquote God, and he was able to use that knowledge to get through the barrier to meet God, and God kind of turned out to be an asshole. So I fixed the movie, and they should have hired me to rewrite some of this, because and actually it's in the trivia, but there was a lot of stuff that was taken out because the Paramount wanted to be less than 2 hours. They wanted an hour 45 or something like that, because they wanted over turnaround in the movie theaters. This is I think this is probably before the time that they would have like the same movie be in multiple theaters, or they knew that this movie wasn't big enough to be in multiple theaters at the same Cineplex or whatever. So those are some of the things. That was the thing that bothered me. It was just way too easy to get through the galactic barrier after making a big deal about why it couldn't be breached. Now,
right. Well, because even Sybok says that, I know I have these visions from God, and Kirk is trying to talk to him in that moment and say, the galactic barrier, we can't get through it. No ship has ever returned and all that. And then you're right. It's sort of like, hey, we're here. They go full forward and it's nothing. My theory about that is, if you've ever had to like run an errand someplace and you're dreading the journey because you have to take surface streets, I think what happened is that they made better time because they had all the green lights going through the barrier, so they just got there quicker. I mean, that's the only thing that makes sense, right? So
and I agree with that, but they shouldn't know. It's like, even when you're on the surface street and you got to deal with a bunch of green lights, you don't know when those lights will turn green. But it's what I'm saying is that if God had reached out to Sybok and told him, okay, if you go at 12:55 p.m. tomorrow and you try to get through the galactic barrier, all the lights will be green at the same time. You will have no problems. But you have to go at exactly this time because if you hit one red light, the starship will be destroyed.
Yeah, that's true. I think you're right. I think they should have put an obstacle or two in there. Chances are the budget dictated that they really couldn't, and they just sort of glossed over making getting in there quicker. But if there had been some sort of an obstacle that required like Sulu to do something that only like he would know or something, or they played into the fact that like Sybok recruited the people that he did because they would have the pieces of the puzzle to come together as a whole to like get through it. Maybe that would have been a little bit more satisfying of a journey to get to this planet. And you're right, as it is, they show up. Kirk's like, there's no way we can go in. And Sybok's like, well, God showed me that we're going to be able to do this. And they just go in, and it's a light show on the view screen and a few shots on the outside. And then they're at the planet, and that's that. So yeah, I can see that being a little bit, they should have put more obstacles in there that required something more of the crew. Yeah,
the same way as maybe somebody from the Enterprise crew, they found a piece of a crescent shaped piece of I don't know, damaged spacecraft, and they held it up to the moon. It was shaped exactly like the damaged piece that you were holding, and that gave them the clue how to get through the galactic barrier, like in one of the Star Wars movies. So,
right. Yeah, I think it was Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah,
where they
that was
did
Rise of Skywalker. I hated that so much.
It would have been amazing had they followed that, and they would have zoomed right in, and it would have been the Death Star there.
Yeah.
I would have been down for that too, because you don't see that coming. So.
Yeah, it would have been the Death Star. That would have been awesome and horrible at the same time. It seemed like Sybok got a haircut, like in the third act. I feel like his hair was longer in the beginning of the movie, and then near the end of the movie, his hair was shorter. I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
You have to look your best to go see God. What are you talking about? I would get a haircut too. So,
also, the crew of the Enterprise were following the crew, like Spock, Bones, McCoy, and Sybok when they were on the planet. I don't know how they were following it. It must have been a probe of some type, or what we would call what do you call them?
Like
those things that fly around, the drone. They must have been a camera drone. They never explained that the Enterprise had a camera drone, but that's the only way that they could be followed. So
they
precisely.
Could be following it right.
It's things like, I hate gaps like that. It bothers me. It's like they're all reacting to it like they're watching an episode of Star Trek. It's like, how are you watching it? They walked out of
It's on the view screen. Yeah. Well, that happened in the original episode of Arena. The Metrons were having the Gorn and Kirk fight it out on the planet, and the Enterprise crew could watch because the Metrons allowed it. So I think maybe coming, like in my head canon, maybe it was something like that where this god creature was able to do it. I like your explanation better of there was some time when Spock's like, hey, release like a drone net or something so we can, or somebody on the ship was like, release the drone so we can watch what's happening to our people in case we have to get them out of there or something. Like that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'm thinking that they just released the drone and didn't tell anybody about it because God doesn't even know what a starship is yet.
Right. This is true.
And so the only way that, and that's why God didn't reach out to Sybok to tell Sybok how to get through the galactic barrier, because God does not even know what a starship is. So that's a huge problem. But if God knows what a starship is, then Captain Kirk couldn't ask, what does God need with a starship? Well, actually, to fix that, all you would have to do is have God say, yeah, bring your starship closer. I brought you here. You didn't have to have God so ignorant that he didn't know what a starship was. That was your first clue that he wasn't God. And the second clue, I mean, because you still could have kept it where God was asking, who is you? Who is that person? It's like, you don't know. You're God.
Right. Yeah. Well, Kirk does call him on that, he does call him on that and stuff. And he definitely has some gaps in his knowledge. And I think within the context of the storytelling, I think that was intentional so that you realize, oh, this the facade that this is God dissolves pretty quick.
Yeah.
And then leads to the revelation that it's just some like malevolent force, like you say, that had like a strong telepathy to be able to like reach Sybok mentally, to be able to bring him in and lure him in there and give him this delusion, because I think Sybok got out of it what he was hoping to get, and was just misguided in his journey and whatnot. I've also wondered too, like how long Sybok was following these visions or this voice. Spock says that he had left Vulcan a long time ago to pursue his own thing, but like how long was he in communication with this creature? Because by the time that he gets to Shakari, he's only got the followers that we've seen him amass during this time of that, starting with the old guy that he encounters at the beginning. His name in the book is John, which sounds very spacey. And so he recruits him. He gets the ambassadors. He gets the Enterprise people on board with him, and that's it. And that's all that we ever see. So who knows how long he had been like bouncing around in space trying to convince people, or developing his like charismatic ways, or whatever the case is. Like there's no telling how long that was, but it's very, very convenient for the plot that he just kind of shows up, amasses people, goes through the barrier, and I think that facade crumbles quickly so that the Enterprise people and us as moviegoers understand that, oh, this isn't really God. This is just something. It's not, I don't believe it's the devil either. I believe that it's just some space being that was banished to space prison on this planet and is very lonely and just, wants to get out and cause terror in the universe. And maybe that backstory would have been more interesting to have explored as well, because we never get that either. Like, what was that thing's deal? Like, what was it? Where did it come from? Was it outside the galaxy? Was it once human and evolved mentally or something? Like, you never get that. And you see patterns of that in Star Trek with like Gary Mitchell becoming too powerful for his own good, and the I think it was the Kelvins in By Any Other Name, who also did the same thing. They hijacked the Enterprise and went to the barrier between the galaxies to go through. And one of the first times Kirk lost control of his ship. So go figure.
Right.
For like the same thing, but they were powerful. But in episodic TV, you only needed enough background to go along for the journey. In the movie, I wish that they had done a little bit more or figured something out, or maybe not, because it's like the Guinan problem again. If you demystify it too much, then it might kind of fall apart a little bit more. And so maybe there is this mystique. Maybe I started life wanting to be a Star Trek book writer, and so maybe one day I'll tackle that. Who knows?
Yeah,
doubtful, but you never know. But I'd like to explore what the hell that thing was that led it to be imprisoned there, because somebody obviously greater than that was able to get control of it and put it in prison until it could, touch a mine somewhere to bring the ship. So, yeah.
Yeah. And we kind of have a clue about Sybok. I think just because most of his followers were in Shakari, this is more of a recent development, him looking for God. Otherwise, he was just going through the galaxy, following his own path. And then like at some point, he was in prison, and we see a piece of that from Star Trek Strange New Worlds, where Spock's betrothed was a prison warden, and one of the prisoners was Sybok. And we got a glimpse of that where they teased that they might explore a little bit more of Sybok's backstory, but they would have to find a way of exploring it without too much exposure between him and Spock. I'm not exactly sure how far they would take that. Knowing Strange New Worlds, they would have a bro fest before they parted it.
oh, for sure. In Star Trek: The Menagerie, Kirk is talking to, I think, Commodore Mendez about Christopher Pike, and Kirk makes the mention that I only met him the one time when I took command of the Enterprise, and that's not true. Strange New Worlds, like they've had a lot of interaction, and they've shared scenes and dialogues. Yeah. So like apparently somewhere along the way, Kirk has his memory erased of ever being on Pike's Enterprise or something. I think it comes back to the continuity doesn't matter as much as just telling a good story, which in the minds of the current writers is what they're going for. But yeah,
or he wants to limit his or he's lying. It's like what?
Right.
He doesn't. There are sometimes it was like you don't want to reveal too much about yourself, and so it's like you're talking to strangers or you're talking to maybe a superior officer, and you're not trying to go all into your entire life story, and so you kind of edit your life story when talking to folks. Like, yeah, I met him that one time. It's like, yeah, it's no big deal, But it's like they're familiar because he doesn't call him Commander Pike or Commodore Pike. He calls him Chris. So he's very familiar with him. So I think we can rewrite the continuity by saying that Kirk is just being, he's just being coy about his relationship with Christopher, or that he doesn't want to reveal too much about himself by talking about how good he knew Christopher. So, at some points you can fix continuity by some of the characters being unreliable narrators.
Right. Yeah, absolutely true. What's funny, so around before Star Trek V came out, around 1986, there was a writer by the name of Vonda N. McIntyre. She wrote a couple of Star Trek books. She did novelizations for Star Trek's 2, 3, and 4 as well. And she wrote a book called Enterprise, The First Adventure, which basically starts with Kirk kind of rounding up his crew to assume command of the Enterprise. And the ceremony between Pike handing off the Enterprise to Kirk is a scene in that book. That book also has a character named Steven. He's a juggler with an intergalactic circus. And he's also a Vulcan that seeks out emotional adventures, and he's Spock's cousin. And so what's kind of funny is you see Sybok, and I'm like, oh, I guess something runs in their family with going towards the emotional stuff, except for Spock and, his parents who wanted him to be more, his father who wanted to be more of a Vulcan. But then it's funny because in Strange New Worlds introduced the character of Doug, the Vulcan that number one has the hots for, that Patton Oswalt played. And he's really emotional and very not Vulcan-like either. So I don't know if that character was in Strange New Worlds to build the case that there are some emotionally driven Vulcans that intentionally seek it out, or if it's just a weird coincidence. But it's just funny that there's sort of this weird again, the non-canon stuff that kind of put this stuff forward that now years later has become canon. And I don't know if it's because more modern writers grew up with those books and it's oh, this is a good idea, I have this thing we can do, or if it's just this weird coincidence because creative people think alike sometimes, and sometimes it just gets pulled out of nowhere. But I thought it was funny that they have made that Sybok reference on Strange New Worlds, and they had this emotional Doug character on there and stuff. So I was real curious to see in the last 2 seasons that show has, if they were going to pull the trigger on doing something with Sybok or not. It's all shot now, so who knows? But I sincerely hope that they do, just to not trying to vindicate Star Trek V or anything, but just to show you a little bit more about that character, because he appears out of nowhere and goes away just as quickly and is never referenced again.
Right. And the other thing is that I don't think Doug is all that emotional. I think he's just fascinated with human beings, because I don't think he's half human, and I don't think he's rejected logic. He's just someone who he's unlike other Vulcans, because where other Vulcans are somewhat repulsed by humans because of the way they smell and how emotional they are, Doug is reveling in that emotion. He's not emotional himself, but he revels in human emotion. And then my favorite part of that episode is, I think it was the outtakes, and it was Spock and Doug having this conversation about humans, and Doug is desperately trying to understand human colloquialisms and whatnot. And it's so funny.
Right. Yeah, the back and forth with him and Spock was really fun. I was in the middle of watching that episode when I had 4 friends text me and say, hey, have you seen the new one yet? I said, no, I'm watching it right now. Okay, well, you have to stay till the end credits. I'm I usually do. So like, this is not something that I'm not going to see. But I had so many people concerned that I was going to miss it somehow. They're like, this is fantastic. You have to stay to the end. Okay, thank you.
So I'm glad that we talked about some of our favorite parts of the movie and that we were able to share these experiences. But now let's go on to the top 10 trivia. This is going to be great.
All right. Well, during pre-production meetings, screenwriter David Lowery jokingly proposed to have Commander Uhura appear as an erotic dancer in order to lure away the hostage takers from the Paradise compound. He was surprised when the producers approved the story right away.
Yeah, that was great. I like, that's probably one of the most memorable parts of this movie.
Yeah, I appreciate that as well. And you know what? Say what you will about the movie, but at least that was something that felt kind of like daring for the time. Like maybe, I don't know, outside of Star Trek for them doing that. But to me, that felt like in the original series when like Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are like on the Nazi planet and they fake illness to like get out of the cell. It feels that like sort of like throwback to like older movies or older like things like that, where you know that nobody's taking this that seriously, and it's an entertaining way to get to what they need, which is the horses from the guys there outside the compound. And I don't know, I think that it works. I think it's again a throwback to the original series because of the way that they did it, and it gave Nichelle Nichols something to do, which is fantastic.
Absolutely. Sybok was originally named Czar, and in earlier drafts of the film was unrelated to Spock. Herb Bennett came up with the Spock-Sybok family relationship to strengthen Spock's rationale regarding his actions relating to Sybok. William Shatner was opposed to the idea, feeling that this was too gimmicky and too much like a plotline out of a soap opera. And in this case, I agree wholeheartedly with William Shatner, because Spock has a secret relative problem. And that relates to the episode of the Star Trek animation series, which I think is at least half canon.
Yeah.
When the episode that I watched, they were on a planet, and in the adventure, there was a being on the planet that made a clone of Mr. Spock. It was a giant clone. So It wasn't so much that he made a copy of Mr. Spock, but he made him a giant. Like, so this new Mr. Spock is standing like a 3 or 4 story building, and is fully conscious, a fully thinking copy of the original Mr. Spock. So Spock has a secret clone. He has a secret sister. He has a secret brother. Originally, his wife or his fiance was a secret. They kind of treated his parents as kind of a secret thing. And then he might even have a secret offspring that they don't talk about. And I'm 100% certain that one of these days somebody's going to explore this secret offspring. So
actually, so here's the funny thing: the animated series episode you're talking about, the Infinite Vulcan. Do you know who wrote that episode of the show?
Yes, it was Walter Koenig, and I was surprised because his character doesn't actually make an appearance in that episode.
that was like the bone that they threw to him. Is like, hey, so because he started writing at that point, he had a book that was I think published called like Buck Alice and the Android Actor or something like that. He was friends with Harlan Ellison, well-known science fiction novelist, wrote City on the Edge of Forever, and they were friends. And so he started to get into that. He also wrote episodes of the 70s TV show Land of the Lost as well for the Croft brothers. But so here's the funny thing about this piece of trivia, and you're talking about like secret offspring for like Spock. There's 2 Star Trek novels. There's one called Yesterday's Sun and one called Time for Yesterday, that was written by a woman by the name of A.C. Crispin. And she picked up a thread from the second to the last episode of the original Star Trek, All Our Yesterdays, where the crew is Kirk, Spock, and McCoy go down to this planet. There's this weird library that's there. Kirk is thrown into like a medieval sort of like witch hunt sort of location, and Spock and McCoy are thrown back to like the Arctic age, like 5,000 years ago on this planet. And they meet this woman that was exiled for crimes, I believe, named Zarabeth. And Spock and Zarabeth like basically have a relationship, and then Spock and McCoy end up going back to where they came from. And the ship zooms off at the end of the episode as Sarpedon explodes, and the end of their history it's come to an end and all that. So then flash forward to to these two books. Yesterday's Sun picks up going back to try to salvage what's left of Sarpedon and its library, and Spock is looking at some historical information there, including some paintings that were found in a cave and like from like a prehistoric society that had been there. And what he sees is the picture of a child that's humanoid and has pointed ears like him, and it comes from the same region that he and McCoy had been thrown back in time to 5,000 years ago. And so Spock realizes that he has this child that he has to go and retrieve, and Spock and McCoy, or Kirk and McCoy, figure it out, and they're like, "We're going to go with you." And they use the Guardian of Forever to travel back to that planet's ice age, and to go and find his son, who is named Czar, by the way, just like they wanted to name Sybok. And they bring him into the present, and they spend some time together. And then at the end, he realizes, Czar realizes that he doesn't spend the rest of his life in isolation, that he'll be a leader on his planet at that point, and that he needs to go back, or else his planet's history is going to be different. And so they let him go. And then there's the sequel book that takes place like 13 years later, and it's a whole thing. But yeah, so he actually does have a secret son. He just died 5,000 years ago on an alien planet. So, but I found it really fascinating that for whatever reason, they picked the name Czar for Sybok, which had the books I described came years before Star Trek V did. So I don't know if somebody was like reading those or heard the Leonard Nimoy narrated books on audio of those two books. But yeah, Czar was already an established name for his son. So weird, right?
Well, I was actually thinking about a different secret son.
Oh,
so,
do tell.
You remember on Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, they find an adolescent Spock or a baby Spock on Genesis, and he's going through adolescence, and he experiences Ponfar, and these are coming in rapid succession because it's supposed to be every 7 years, but Spock is growing at an accelerated rate. So like every 10 minutes, he's going through Ponfar and getting older. Well, he's kind of have to relieve that tension. And what's her name again? I keep forgetting.
Sybok.
Yeah. So Sybok is calming him down. She's touching her fingers to his fingers, touching him. And basically it's been suggested that the only way that she could truly relieve the tension is to, for real, relieve the tension.
Yep.
So she's had to have sex with Spock like several times as he's going through Ponfar. And when Star Trek 4 begins, she is noticeably left on Vulcan, and she doesn't join the rest of the crew on the mission, even though she's still technically an officer on the Enterprise. Right. So what they were going to write into the script is that she doesn't go because she's pregnant with Spock's child, and that's why she doesn't go. But they decided to write that out of the script. But it's not officially canon, but it's something that they can always go back to. It's always going to be in their back pocket. And as a matter of fact, there was this weird AI / live action thing that some fans of Star Trek did. It was like fan made, but it's backed by Gene Roddenberry's son. I don't know if
Yeah,
you've seen
from
it. Have you heard
Otoy.
about this?
Yes, yeah, Otoy. Yeah, the short film of basically Shatner coming back as Kirk, but it's like an AI thing. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And you see Sybok, and I think she's there with like a young man in like his thing, and you can kind of infer that that's like Spock's son. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, I know
Actually, I
exactly
think it
what
was
you're
an
talking
older man, but yeah, that was
about. Well, yeah,
supposed to.
because he would have been older.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But yeah, that is supposed to be Spock's son. And so they're going along with that thread. And the original actor that played Sybok that's the one that plays Sybok in this AI
Yep.
short film. So at least there are some portions of the Star Trek fandom and in the Star Trek universe that's adhering to that idea. So yeah, Spock has a lot of secret relatives. It's way too many, and they kind of need to stop. William Shatner was right in this case.
Well, it's funny because it said that Shatner thought the idea was like out of a soap opera. The ironic part is that Harv Bennett wrote that part of Star Trek 4 that would have revealed that Sybok was pregnant with Spock's child, but he cut it because he felt that would be too soap opera-y at that point. So it's kind of funny. They're all thinking along the terms of like, all my children and one life to live and stuff, and realizing, no, we don't want to go in that direction. And so be it.
Right. So be it.
All right. Well, Sir Sean Connery was first offered to play Sybok, but couldn't accept on account of scheduling conflicts with Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. The mythical planet Shakari was named in honor of Sean Connery. So, yeah, years and years ago, Elizabeth Shatner, William's daughter, wrote a book about the making of Star Trek 5, and they covered that in that, and that has been one of those things that always stuck with me, because it's like, it's right there in like the open. They didn't even try to hide that, and I thought that was pretty funny that made it to that wasn't like a placeholder for another planet name or something. They're like, you know what? We hit it out of the park. This guy said, no, we're going to put him in here anyway. This is the name of the planet.
Right. That's amazing. That would have been awesome to see Sean Connery as Sybok.
I would have wondered how they would have reconciled his accent, though, with the fact that Spock and Sarek don't have like the same sort of accent. Maybe he would have been raised in like the other hemisphere of Vulcan or something. Who knows? Maybe his mom would have had the accent.
Yeah, they would not have cared. They would have just been happy to get Sean Connery.
I wonder if that had been the case. I wonder who they would have gotten to have played Indiana Jones's dad in Last Crusade. But I think in the end, though, I think that Sean Connery made the better decision to be in Last Crusade and an Indiana Jones movie rather than Star Trek. But I think it would have been an interesting kind of crossover to see what he would have brought to the character of Sybok, so we'll never know, but it would have been cool.
Yeah, it would have been cool. Up next, we have Lawrence Luckinbill, who played Sybok, is the real-life son-in-law of Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball, whose Desilu production company produced the first 2 seasons of Star Trek from 1966. And that's amazing. I enjoyed learning that.
Yeah, Lucille Ball is one of those people too that's like one of the she's getting more attention for it now, but she was the one that kept Star Trek going when the network was like, we need to see a second pilot. I think she actually ended up like liquidating some assets to be able to afford that second pilot to show the proof of concept that Star Trek would work. She believed in what the show was. She was headed to the studio, and when they were filming the first pilot for Star Trek, she went down to the studio to find out why they were running behind and like over schedule. Because when the cage was first made, it cost like $600,000, which at the time was the most expensive pilot ever produced for TV. And which is amazing when you see like something like Lost that costs a lot, or the fact that like every episode of Discovery costs like $9 and $10 million to make, and $600,000 is nothing. But she sort of is being heralded in more recent times in the last decade or so as being one of the people that believed in Star Trek and became one of its saviors, to the point where there's actually an action figure of Lucille Ball and Gene Roddenberry that is scheduled to come out in the next couple of months, I think it is. So She's sort of part of Star Trek canon, I guess, because of the action figure, but she's one of those unheralded figures. And the fact that her real life son-in-law was Sybok, it's like it kind of brings things like full circle. It's kind of weird, but kind of cool at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. DeForest Kelley went into seclusion after filming the death of Dr. McCoy's father because he was deeply personally involved with his own father. Which at that point, I wonder if his own father was still alive. I wouldn't think so, because DeForest Kelley was about 10 years away from passing away himself at this point, would have been in his late 60s. But I wonder if it hit him in like that real personal way, like maybe his own father had like a similar sort of struggle or ailment, or if he ever had to make that decision to take his father off of life support in real life. I wish there was more information about that.
Yeah, I didn't do any further research, but I was struck by how, like, when actors go through the process and they have to reach for something personal to reach whatever emotional depth that they need to perform a scene. I thought this was interesting because I've heard like Lou Gossett Jr. had like the same experiences where he had to act out a scene where where the character's mother was passing away and he was in the hospital with this mother in the same way, right? Because the director asked him, was like, do you need a moment to prepare? He's like, no, I can do it right now. It happened just like this. So yeah, sometimes it's like, sometimes the actor doesn't have to go too far to reach for a personal experience to reach the emotion that they need.
Yeah. Well, he definitely brought something to that scene because it feels very, very intimate. It feels very real. And you really feel more for Dr. McCoy there than almost, I think, any other time that he was on screen in Star Trek. You know, it's like that thing that like hits really hard, I think, for the viewers, because we spent over 20 years getting to know the characters at that point, and then to see him in such pain over something like that, and to see the struggle that we never knew about is great. And DeForest Kelley was excellent in that scene for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Originally, Spock and McCoy were to side with Sybok. Leonard Nimoy and DeForest Kelley objected, saying their characters would never betray Captain Kirk. Gene Roddenberry agreed. So, yeah, I think that makes sense. They know what their characters are.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Roddenberry would go on to say that Star Trek V was apocryphal, meaning that like it's not really canon, but he said that about the animated series, or maybe it was Paramount that said that about the animated series. I forget who said that, but over the time, Star Trek V has been accepted as like this adventure happened, deal with it. And the animated series, the same thing, even though there's like weird technology in the animated series, like the they can put on like these belts and like walk around in space. That never really came back exactly. And so, but it's accepted that those adventures of Kirk and Spock and the rest like happened. Roddenberry flip-flopped over the years about it because it was animation. So who knows? But I do think it's a smart move to not have Spock and McCoy betray Kirk. Kirk is that the glue between those two that like snaps him out of like wanting to follow Sybok. And I think that betrayal is appropriate within the movie.
And the funny thing is that it's not like they've never betrayed them, but betrayed Captain Kirk. But it's more like Sybok's control is more like a heavy suggestion. Like it's better than it's a little bit better than hypnosis, but it's not full mind control. So there were the other times when Spock and McCoy betrayed Kirk, they were under full mind control where they weren't in their right minds.
Right.
But in this case, it's just such a heavy influence that people sometimes they can't help themselves, or they can't think through it to break through that particular type of hypnotic suggestion.
No, I think that's valid. William Shatner's cut ran slightly over 2 hours, not including in credits or the opticals, which Paramount Studios thought was too long. Their target runtime was 1 hour and 45 minutes, which would guarantee twice nightly theatrical screenings. Harv Bennett was handed the task of shortening the film's runtime, despite Shatner's view that nothing could possibly be removed. Shatner was horrified by Bennett's edit, and the two haggled over what parts to restore or delete.
Yeah, that is one of those parts. Must have been how they got through the barrier.
So I have a copy of the script of Star Trek V, like a studio copy. It's got like numbers on it, so you're not supposed to duplicate it, but it did. And what I basically have was like the final version, the final draft of the script. So it doesn't have a lot of extraneous or like extra things, but I'd be curious to know what Bennett's edit looked like compared to what the final one was and what Shatner was hoping to accomplish and what he would have done. Because I know that there were certain parts that the budget played a big part into not having, the Rockman at the end and stuff that was famously picked up by Galaxy Quest like a decade later and stuff like that. But I'd be curious to know what Harv Bennett thought that the edit needed to be versus what Shatner did, and how they got to the final edit, because I don't really feel like I have a feeling that the things Shatner would have kept in would have been maybe jokier type stuff. When Kirk first gets to the bridge of the Enterprise, when he gets back onto the ship, and he has his go climb a rock shirt on from Yosemite, he hands his jacket to his yeoman. And there was a joke that because he handed her that, she didn't know where to go and like hang it. Like there's no coat racks on the Enterprise. So like she's originally in like longer cuts of this, there's supposed to be a thing of you see her wandering the bridge and not knowing where to go. The yeoman was his daughter to begin with, who wrote the book about the making of the movie. But the other thing is that part of that still sort of survive in that scene. Like every now and then you'll see like a cut where she's sort of there and looking confused. And it was supposed to have been this joke that was written into it that just didn't really land, I think. And so remnants are in there. But I'd be really curious to know like what other stuff he wanted in there. If it was more comedy stuff or if it was like a different chronology to how it was supposed to unfold. Like I'd be very curious to know what he was after versus what Bennett was after.
Right. That would be interesting to see those negotiations. So, according to George Takei, he originally turned down this film because he did not want to be directed by William Shatner, with whom he has had a long-standing feud. But Shatner convinced Takei to reprise his role. And I'm kind of glad he did. Takei has some really nice moments in that movie.
Yeah. I feel like because the original cast was still together at this point, that they were still, able to do their roles, like to have a Star Trek movie without Sulu in it, would be kind of shorting the fans as well. I've heard an alternate version of this, that when the studio first announced that Star Trek V was going to have Shatner directing it, that Takei and Koenig and Nichelle Nichols and James Doohan got together and said, what are we going to do about this? There's no way that we want him to direct us. And they kind of talked it out amongst themselves, and Shatner went and talked to them. Takei and Shatner had a very public feud. It wouldn't be until a few years after this, around 93, 94, when Shatner was writing his books about his Star Trek memories and Star Trek movie memories, that he went to Nichelle Nichols and got an interview with her, and then he shut off the recorder, and she made the offhand comment, do you want to know why we all hated you? And he's like, yes. And so they talked about it, because he had this huge ego and other people perceived that he took screen time from them, and maybe as a person just wasn't as agreeable. Sometimes people rub you the wrong way, especially Shatner, known for like having a weird sense of humor and liking puns, and maybe Takei didn't quite roll like that, and didn't think him professional or whatever the case. But that was when it came to light that like a lot of the other cast just didn't really like him. And he was kind of oblivious to this until she brought it up. And so this doesn't really surprise me. But like you said, I'm glad he was able to get George Takei and that they all came back to make the movie with him, because it's not a Star Trek film if you don't have all the key players in it, right?
Yeah. At least most of them. At least like
one of the things that Decay really wanted was that he felt that by that time, and he's not wrong, but by this time, with their time in service in Starfleet, he should have his own ship. And he had been pushing for Sulu to have his own ship for a long time. And he finally got that in Star Trek 6. So, and it's not like they use these characters a whole lot anyway. It's almost always been centered on Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. So a lot of these characters should be on the ship. Actually, Walter Koenig has been on another ship in Star Trek 2. He was the first officer on a different ship, and then through the course of adventure, got brought back to the Enterprise. So yeah, I can see the rationale for keeping the crew together, but I can also see another rationale where you shoot a movie in such a way where you still get to see the characters, but you can see them also advancing in their careers and going on and having different accomplishments.
Right. Well, and the fact that by the time Star Trek 5 rolled around, Kirk is a captain, Spock is a captain, Scotty's a captain. Like they all hold that that rank, and it's like, okay, what are we doing here? All these captains. Also, according to Takei, despite studio pressure to complete the film, William Shatner maintained a creative and enthusiastic atmosphere on set. Quote, I have enormous admiration for his ability to block that kind of pressure from seeping onto the set. End quote. Moreover, Takei acknowledged, despite our sometimes strained personal history, I found working with Bill as a director to be surprisingly pleasant. So that's good to know, too, that people that accuse him of being an egotistical monster as a director was not an egotistical monster. So it's just when he's acting, apparently. But
I think more like he mellowed out in his old age.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think he realized that he had at this point, too, in 1989, Shatner is almost 60, and he's probably thinking, well, I'm going to be dead by the time I'm 65 or 70. So this is like my third act here. And he got TJ Hooker and Star Trek and like all these things. And then who knew going into the 90s and 2000s that Miss Congeniality would make him more relevant and being the Priceline guy and appearing on sitcoms. And like you say, all the spots he does for voiceovers or cameos or all these things, is what keeps him relevant today. I mean, my God, the man went to space sort of and became an astronaut sort of. And so, he left the planet, but not for long. But him and Katy Perry, I want to see that show. I want to see Captain Kirk and Katy Perry on some sort of ship having adventures. I would be down for that new Star Trek. But,
right. Yeah, the thing is, I feel like when you get older, you realize a lot of stuff that you were concerned about when you were younger, it really doesn't matter that much. Because it's like you see the fullness of time. It's like as you get older, time seems to be going faster. And you come to realize that things move in cycles or history starts to repeat itself. And you're allowed to let go of certain things that you've been holding on to. So I think that's probably what happened with William Shatner. And the other thing is that when you're what they say, number one on the call sheet, especially on a TV show, you have an enormous amount of power. You have a lot of privilege being the star of a TV show. And this is probably the first time that this has ever happened to William Shatner at that time, given all of this power and responsibility. He kind of took it too far, right? So, where somebody else probably wouldn't have or will have a completely different disposition. So you go and you think about other relationships that had developed. So what I'm thinking about is Star Trek The Next Generation and how that group of actors, like a family, like they go to each other's wedding. They're always in contact. They're always in support of each other. And that particular show, you feel like all of the actors that had been involved in that show, they're all still very best friends with each other. Right. So, and how that relationship was kind of shepherded by Patrick Stewart. Like when he first came on the set, he was very serious, and then he learned to mellow out and playing pranks on people. Now people are playing pranks on each other, and it's very pleasant, as opposed to like Deep Space Nine, where Avery Brooks was very serious and everybody was very professional with each other. They're not, they don't hate each other, but they're friendly with each other, but they're not like best friends.
Right.
And then
right.
how I've recently heard about, I forgot his name, but it's the lead actor for Strange New Worlds.
Anson Mount.
Yeah, Anson Mount. So everybody loves Anson Mount. It's like everybody's
right.
Like, it's like he's everybody's pawpaw, right? And there's a podcast I listen to. It's called Open Pike Night. And
I've heard of that.
Oh, have you listened to it?
I haven't listened to it, but I've heard of it. I think I've seen him on social media and been friendly with him in the past. Because my Blue Sky account is all about animation. It's generally not. It's mostly about Star Trek these days. So I thought maybe I should convert over to another account and carry on with that and try to keep the stream separate. But I don't care. It's all polluted with Star Trek now, anyways. And I talk about my show when it comes out, and that's about it. So, but I know those guys you're talking about. Yeah,
you should check that out, because they talk to a lot of the creatives that are involved with Strange New Worlds, and they all talk about, like, many of them are talking about Anson Mount and his acting process, his leading process, how he leads the crew, and everybody generally has a lot of positive things to say about him and each other, and nice. It feels like a really good cast. At least their relationships feel really good. So that's one of the things that struck me as amazing. And the reason that I listen to the show is because they're a call-in show. It's like they ask for listener feedback about a certain episode, or they give you an opportunity to ask questions of either the actors or the directors or the showrunners or something like that. So you can call in and you can ask a question, and they'll play your question on the podcast, and the actor or their guest will respond to the question. So I've done that a number of times.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So I think we're on the last one, aren't we?
Yep. Yeah, number J.
Number J. An accomplished singer and dancer, Nichelle Nichols, provided an authentic performance of the fan dance routine in this film. She was outraged when her vocals in the scene were later overdubbed in editing without her approval. And I don't think they should have David Prowsed her. That was bad.
Yeah. Nichelle Nichols, who is known for being in Porgy and Bess with like Duke Ellington, and was a singer and had a career as a singer and released stuff and tried to capitalize on her famous Uhura to put out records that were like Star Trek themed and stuff like that. Like, don't take that away from her. I don't know if it was something to do with Hiroshima needed to have like their vocalist do it or something. I don't know what that is, but that's like Nichelle Nichols was a singer. Like, let her have her moment, you know?
Right. Let her have her things that she was known for most of her career, and how she didn't leave Star Trek to go back to doing that.
Right.
Like Absolutely. She wanted to, because she wasn't being utilized in the TV show. So yeah, I think I would really like to see the unedited version where they actually had her vocals on there. It's a shame that they did that. So that's it for the trivia that I found on IMDb. Some of the most interesting trivia that I found there. It had a lot, so you might want to go and check it out if these things interest you. And now we're going to talk about what the critics thought. The critics had it at a 22%. The audience of Popcorn Meter had a 25%. So at the time, not a lot of outgoing like fan appreciation of this movie. On Rotten, and this is all on Rotten Tomatoes. On IMDb reviews has it at 5.5 out of 10. So we have like Wesley Lovell from Cinema Site. He wrote, after years of success at the head of the Trek universe,
Shatner seemed to think that he could do no wrong. Not only did he, but he excelled in being bad in 3 different roles: as an actor, as a writer, and as a director. Now, in this case, I kind of disagree, at least with a couple of these. Like, I disagree that he's a bad actor. He's very good in this. There's something about William Shatner that's absolutely charming. And it's like, and you kind of miss it sometimes because it's not like he reaches out. It's not, he doesn't like deeply go into being somebody else. He's not like Daniel Day-Lewis. So he's
Right.
basically a working actor and I think that a good actor is like, all you really have to do is have the ability to convey your emotion to the audience. And William Shatner is able to do that very well. Also, there, like I said, there's a kind of charm that surrounds him that you can't help but notice. Like when I really noticed this was when he was in Showtime. So he's playing himself in Showtime. And it's like, it's so funny because they make no references to Star Trek. They make it seem like he's most famous for TJ Hooker, and he's teaching police officers how to be TV cops. And that it's so fascinating. He's teaching them how to do a roll and stuff like that. It's so how to roll over a car hood. And Robert De Niro's in the movie. He plays the disgruntled cop that has to work with these actors. And he's like, there's a reason that cops don't actually do that in real life.
Right.
So,
for sure.
I really, like when you see William Shatner's and other things outside of Star Trek, you come to an appreciation for his charm and his sensibilities as an actor. So I don't agree with that. And the other thing I don't agree with it as a writer, because he's not the only person that wrote this film. And some of the worst parts of the writing were not his decision, like making Sybok a secret relative. I don't think that was necessary. And, but as a director, I think that's also misunderstood because as we've discussed about this movie, if this had been the first Star Trek movie instead of the 5th Star Trek movie, I think it would have been much better received. He probably would have directed a bunch of stuff after that.
Well, the other thing too is really ranking him as a director. It's not so much looking at the final product in the film, but looking at the performances of the actor. Because on this particular thing, the person that would have had the final edit would have been the producer, which was Harve Bennett. Robin Hullabird, not the strongest franchise entry. The film features impressive location work in areas within driving reach of Yosemite, including tufa formations known as the Trona Pinnacles at the Dry Cereals Lake, stepping in as a planet called Shockery, which is misspelled here. So that's a real fun review. That person was totally invested in the location and obviously not the content of the movie. It's like if you go and like watch Avatar and you're like, I didn't like the movie because all the location shooting seemed fake. It's like, but it was. So like you're looking at the wrong thing. That's an amazingly bad review. That's like, you know what that is? That's like the Star Trek nemesis of reviews right there. It's not the strongest entry.
Ryan Murphy wrote, well, he's from the Miami Herald, and he wrote, while intimate scenes of male bonding among Kirk, Spock, and Bones McCoy are particularly delightful, the film's overall themes, God creation, friendships, and family, are never tied together or amply explained. So I kind of disagree with this because, I mean, I agree with the first part about how the union, the togetherness of the 3 main characters was charming. It was fun. They got a lot of the humor out of the 3 of them interacting with each other. I especially like when they're playing row your boat, and they said, Spock, you're supposed to be having fun. It's like, I thought this was the having fun part. So yeah, they got a lot of mileage out of the 3 of them being together. But as far as, I guess what he's saying that the God relationship and the friendships and family themes are not tied together. And I guess he's right in that aspect. But, I don't think they're meant to be tied together. I think these are 2 separate parallel themes that are supposed to be running through the movie.
I think for me that comparison is like saying in Back to the Future, how come they didn't tie in Marty's parents to Doc creating a time machine. Like those things aren't related. They're just separate parts of the overall narrative, but they don't necessarily have to tie together. I do think the friendships as family comes through because there's the family that we have, like Spock and Sybok, and then there's the family that we make for ourselves with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy and the other Enterprise crew. So I don't think they necessarily had to be tied together. So it's sort of it's kind of a weird review that they would look for these to come together when not every movie ever does that. So what a weird review.
Right.
The other thing with that too is I will say this, Star Trek V ends with a really hopeful ending because it ends in, the lounge, and you have the Romulan ambassador, and you have the Klingons and the Federation people, and they're drinking with each other. And even Scotty's like, I never thought I'd be drinking with a Klingon. And it's very hopeful for this future that maybe they'll, one day put aside their differences and they'll come together, Klingons and Federation, which the next movie then explored that unintentionally, an extension of this. But that's also about friendship. It's about finding possible friends in your enemies with like Claw and Cord and Vixis and the rest of them all together and chilling, because I think in Star Trek, in at least the original series, every time the Klingons were on the Enterprise, they weren't there as friends, but this ends on a more hopeful note that maybe they'll put past differences aside to pursue a more peaceful future together. And that's about unity. That's, in some ways, if you're looking for God, if you're looking for like a Christian God that's about love and unity, that's there in the ending. And so that ties it together for me with those two themes. But I don't know. I'm no Ryan Murphy from the Miami Herald, so what do I know?
Well, also, I feel like because this film was at the same time as Star Trek The Next Generation, I think they were also nodding to that. Like, they know that the Klingon and the Federation aren't going to continue to be enemies for very long. At least they'll have a brief period of cooperation, if not outright friendship. So they're nodding to what they know that is currently happening in the other parts of the Trek universe. So, but I appreciated that too. Also, I kind of skipped over Captain Claw and his whole thing. He also didn't have any problems getting through the barrier. But the other thing about that is that I like those performances on the Klingon spaceship. So I just wanted to say that before we continue. So why don't you get the...
Well, I was going to say same. I was going to say same here. I love the chemistry between the actresses Claw and Vixis, and it's like when we first roll up on him and he's like target practicing with like the Voyager probes and stuff like that. I kind of got the impression that if there had been some sort of I don't know, like low budget side movie with just those guys on the Klingon ship, I would have been pretty happy with that too. Maybe it's because I know all the Klingon lore that came afterwards, but like, them cruising around in like the neutral zone in their bird of prey and having their own like little adventures or whatever, like I would have been fine with. Maybe the Deep Space Nine Trials and Tribulations episode touches on the fact that Klingons and Tribbles are like mortal enemies. I could see Captain Claw being like the lead ship in the Klingon Tribble War to go and like annihilate them because they were such a menace to the Empire after the trouble with Tribbles. Like I would go and I would watch that movie because he kind of has a comical kind of feel. He's not really menacing. I feel like he kind of tries to be, but it was Star Trek V, so it's more of a playful menace. So I could see him doing something like that in the Star Trek universe, and I would pay for that Paramount Plus show to watch it. So
yeah, he's more of a lower decks version of the Klingons.
yeah. I think that's a great explanation for who he is. Absolutely.
Right.
All right. Go ahead.
No, just so you can get the last one.
Okay. Kevin Thomas of the Los Angeles Times said it has high adventure, nifty special effects, and much good humor, but it also has a wonderful resonance to it. And what I love about this review is that it's the last one after the other ones are like, this is a pile of dog crap, and this is actually hopeful. This is somebody that at least tended to like parts of it and tried to find that positive. That's what I try to do on my show. If I'm watching a show that got canceled after 4 episodes, I'm always like, where's the good in this? Like, what would people remember? What would we celebrate? So I'm glad that somebody at the time actually took a moment to write a good review, even if it's only a handful of words. At least it's not like, don't waste your time, Gene Shalit or something like that. So that's a good review. I love going out on that one.
Right. I wanted to go out on something hopeful.
It's funny that they mentioned the quote unquote nifty special effects. The special effects for this one were not done by Industrial Light and Magic. There's a guy by the name of Bran Farron who was into visual effects. I think he's worked for Disney over the years, and I believe as of recent, he's like an entrepreneur that like goes in like weird different directions. I recently learned with, unfortunately, the real life like creeping into my reality that the Jeffrey Epstein birthday book, they had that available to look at for like PDF, and I'm like, oh, who's in this thing? The guy who did the special effects for Star Trek V had written a card to Jeffrey Epstein to wish him happy birthday on his 50th, and is in that book. And I'm like, no, not Bran Farron. No, not him. But of all the things he could have done in his life to also not really on the Epstein list, but to be associated with that, it's like, you don't want that to get out in Star Trek lore, because then Star Trek V will be even more maligned. But I thought I would address it for anybody that was like me that might have known that weird piece of trivia. But I do like his special effects too. They don't look like ILM. They have a very different sort of thing, especially like the barrier at the end of in the middle of the galaxy being like that weird kind of cool blue, and like the twinkling to it, and the way that some of the effects were achieved were like low budget, but they came across well on film. And I think that also sets Star Trek V apart, is because it doesn't have the special effects of like the motion picture or Industrial Light and Magic from the Genesis trilogy and stuff like that. So I think it kind of feels like it does sort of belong outside of the rest of the movies, because it just has a different sort of vibe and feel and tone to it. But I enjoy that. It's one of the things I do like about it is the visuals. It looks cool in a way that the other ones look more slick and polished, and this one just kind of has its own thing going for it. So I appreciate that. Right.
Yeah, but you kind of wonder how like ILM would have did it. But it's like I didn't notice any deficit from this movie. Like none of my complaints came from what the special effects look like. Well, finally, Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, is, as of this recording, available on Paramount Plus. Now, to finally close out the original Star Trek series, I think it's time that we talk about the final and one of the best films of that franchise, Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. You can follow us on Blue Sky, Threads, TikTok, Instagram, and sometimes Twitter at Backlick Cinema. Please contact us with any questions, comments, or suggestions at friends@backlickcinema.com. Please rate and review on your favorite podcast app. And if you're listening on YouTube, please like or subscribe or leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Chris, do you have any additional plugs?
Not really. The Saturday morning podcast can be found where people get their podcasts. By the time people are hearing this, my latest episode, Chuck Norris Karate Commandos, will have been released. I'd like to clear the air and say I wrote that and produced it 6 months ago before Chuck was hospitalized or anything like that. It's just a weird coincidence that it's coming out like right after his passing. But I have recently surpassed 150 episodes. Congratulations to you for being 200 plus. I think that in the podcasting world, anybody that can go more than 10, it's really telling that they're sticking with it. If you can go past 50 and 100, then it's something that you obviously do. And by the time you hit 200, I think it's a way of life by that point. So the fact that you're past 200 and you're heading towards that 300 milestone, I think is very impressive. If I doubt that I'm going to bring in any new fans to you, but if there are people out there, I would implore them all to go back in Zoe's catalog to listen to what he's done. And I can be found anywhere where you get your podcast under the name The Saturday Morning Podcast. If you like old 80s cartoons, we're now doing the syndicated shows because I've run out of all the network stuff. And so it's full steam ahead on things like The Real Ghostbusters in syndication, and the Police Academy TV show, and the Super Mario Brothers Super Show are coming up later in my current season.
So I really appreciate you. So I'm glad you're doing that work. So one last time, if you like this show, then please help us grow by spreading the word about Backlit Cinema, the podcast. Believe me, it matters. And I know you've enjoyed our guest, Christopher J. So please check out Saturday Morning Podcast. I've been Zoe Richardson. Be safe, share a movie from yesteryear with your family, hug your loved ones, and if you're going to be anything, be outstanding.